"You're just after my money," he said. "I'm not the father of these twins." But 5 years later, the twins' faces told the truth. Missouri Turner had been on her feet for almost 13 hours when she finally pushed open the door to Rosie's Diner on Maple Street. The little restaurant smelled like buttered biscuits, grilled onions, and fresh coffee. Old country music hummed softly from a dusty speaker above the counter, while tired customers finished late dinners beneath glowing yellow lights. Outside, water slid steadily down the windows as cars moved slowly through the streets of Briarwood, Alabama. Missouri adjusted the hospital hoodie hanging loosely over her scrubs before guiding her twins toward a booth near the back. "Okay," she sighed, dropping into the seat. "Nobody asked me to cook tonight because your mother is officially done being responsible." Ellie grinned instantly. "That means fries. That absolutely means fries." Huey climbed quietly into the booth beside his sister while holding the small sketch pad he carried almost everywhere now. Unlike Ellie, who spoke before thinking, Huey observed everything first. Rosie, the older waitress with silver curls and bright red lipstick, approached carrying menus. "Well, look at my favorite, Turner family," she said warmly. "Long day again?" Missouri laughed tiredly. "You have no idea." Rosie looked toward the twins. "And what are we having tonight?" "Cheeseburger," Ellie answered immediately. "Grilled cheese," Huey said softly without looking up from his sketch pad. Rosie nodded knowingly. "One dramatic order and one safe order. Same as always." After she walked away, Missouri leaned back against the booth and rubbed her eyes. Briarwood Children's Hospital had been chaos all week. 2 emergency surgeries, 1 screaming parent, 3 overnight shifts, and barely enough sleep to think straight. She loved her job, but some nights felt heavier than others. Ellie grabbed a crayon from the dispenser near the napkins and began doodling stars across a paper placemat. "You look grumpy," she announced. "I am grumpy. You should eat fries. That may be the smartest thing anyone's said to me all day." Huey finally looked up. "You said that to Nurse Kelly yesterday, too." Missouri pointed at him. "See, this is why I can't relax around y'all tiny detectives." Ellie giggled loudly. At the front counter, someone entered the diner carrying the cold evening air inside with him. Missouri barely noticed. She was too busy helping Ellie open a ketchup packet while Huey stirred his strawberry milkshake absent-mindedly with a straw. The diner remained comfortably noisy around them. Plates clinking, coffee pouring, soft conversations blending together. Then everything changed. Huey stopped stirring. Completely. His eyes lifted toward the entrance. For a second he simply stared. Then he spoke quietly. "Mom." Missouri grabbed a fry from Ellie's plate. Huey pointed carefully across the diner. "Why does that man look exactly like me?" The fry slipped from Missouri's fingers. Her entire body went still. Slowly, painfully slowly, she turned her head and forgot how to breathe. Standing near the front register with a coffee cup halfway lifted toward his mouth was Jeffrey Schoen. 5 years disappeared instantly. The diner, the voices, the music. Everything around her seemed to fade beneath the sudden pounding in her chest. Jeffrey looked older now, more tired. His dark coat was damp from outside, and faint lines sat near his eyes that hadn't been there years ago. But it was him, the same man who once kissed her forehead while she slept beside him, the same man who looked at an ultrasound photo and said, "These twins are not mine." Missouri's stomach tightened painfully. No, not here, not now. Across the diner, Jeffrey noticed the staring. At first his attention landed on Missouri. Confusion crossed his face immediately. Then his eyes shifted toward the little boy sitting beside her, and the coffee cup trembled in his hand. Huey stared back at him with the exact same thoughtful expression Jeffrey himself had worn his entire life without realizing it. Same dark eyes, same sharp brows, same slight tilt of the head. Jeffrey's fingers slowly loosened around the paper cup. A few drops of coffee spilled onto his hand, but he didn't react, because suddenly he couldn't hear anything around him either. His gaze moved toward Ellie. The little girl was studying him openly now, curiosity written all over her face. Then she blinked twice quickly, exactly the way he did whenever he was confused. Jeffrey's chest tightened hard. "No." His breathing slowed unevenly. Missouri instinctively reached for her water glass just to keep her hands occupied. "Stay calm. Do not let the children panic. Do not let him see you shaking." But her pulse was crashing so loudly she thought the twins might hear it. Ellie leaned closer toward Missouri and whispered loudly enough for half the booth to hear. "He looks scared." Missouri swallowed carefully. "Ellie, what?" Ellie asked innocently. "He does Jeffrey finally lowered the coffee cup onto a nearby table before he dropped it completely. His eyes returned to Huey again, the sketch pad, the small pencil in his hand, even the way the boy sat slightly hunched while thinking. Jeffrey used to sit exactly the same way during meetings. A cold wave of realization moved through him all at once. Not suspicion, not possibility. Truth, pure and undeniable. Huey looked down at his sketch pad again for a second before glancing back up. "Mom," he asked quietly, "do you know him?" Missouri opened her mouth. Nothing came out. For several painful seconds, nobody moved. The older couple eating pie near the window kept talking. Someone laughed near the counter. A waitress carried fresh coffee past their booth. But inside that tiny space between the four of them, everything had stopped. Jeffrey looked like a man watching his entire past walk back into the room without warning. Missouri forced herself to sit straighter. She would not fall apart in front of her children. Not tonight. Not because of him. Ellie tilted her head again while studying Jeffrey carefully. "You really do look like Huey," she said. Jeffrey blinked slowly. The sound of her voice nearly destroyed whatever composure he had left, because somehow, even her expressions felt familiar too. He remembered Missouri laughing years ago while teasing him about how serious he looked whenever he concentrated. Now that exact expression sat on a little boy's face across the diner. 5 years. 5 entire years. Gone. Wasted. Missouri finally met Jeffrey's eyes fully for the first time since he walked in. And what he saw there hurt more than anger. Disappointment. The kind that comes after someone stops expecting better from you. Jeffrey took one careful step toward the booth. Then another, like he wasn't completely certain the floor beneath him still existed. Huey watched him approach with open curiosity while Ellie scooted closer against Missouri's side. Jeffrey stopped beside the table, close enough now to see every detail clearly, close enough to know there was no escaping the truth sitting in front of him. Missouri's voice came out calm. Too calm. "You were wrong." The words landed softly, but Jeffrey felt them like a punch to the chest. Nobody spoke afterward. Not immediately, because there was nothing left to argue about anymore. The proof was sitting right there holding a milkshake and crayons, and for the first time in years, Jeffrey Schoen looked completely lost. If you've ever watched someone realize they made the biggest mistake of their life, this story is going to hit hard, because Jeffrey still didn't understand something yet. Seeing the twins tonight would only be the beginning. The real pain was waiting inside the memory of how he lost them in the first place. Jeffrey's eyes lowered briefly toward Huey's sketch pad again. Tiny pencil drawings of buildings covered the page, sharp rooftops, tall windows, city skylines, exactly like the sketches Jeffrey used to draw on napkins years ago. His throat tightened. Missouri noticed the exact moment recognition fully settled into him, and somehow that hurt too. Outside, headlights stretched across the wet streets while another car passed slowly beyond the diner windows. Inside the booth, Huey looked between the adults with growing confusion. "Mom." Missouri gently reached for his hand beneath the table, but her eyes never left Jeffrey's. Then finally, the memory returned. 5 years earlier, rain was falling that night too. 5 years earlier, Missouri Turner was losing a fight against 2 overloaded grocery bags and a broken umbrella. By the time she pushed through the sliding doors of Harper's Market, her sneakers were already soaked through. The automatic door shut behind her with a tired hiss while cold droplets clung to the loose curls escaping her ponytail. "Perfect," she muttered under her breath. The storm had arrived out of nowhere near the end of her hospital shift. 1 minute the sky was clear. The next, half of Briarwood looked underwater. Missouri adjusted the grocery bags hanging painfully from her wrists and hurried toward the parking lot. She still needed laundry, sleep, and somehow enough energy to survive another 12-hour shift tomorrow. Adult life was disrespectful like that. A loud crack of thunder rolled overhead just as one of the paper bags suddenly tore open. "Oh, come on!" Oranges scattered across the pavement instantly. One rolled beneath a pickup truck. Another bounced toward the handicap parking sign. A third spun directly into a puddle near her shoe. Missouri closed her eyes briefly. "This is exactly how horror movies start," she sighed. She crouched quickly, trying to gather them before more escaped into traffic. Then a polished brown shoe stopped beside one of the oranges. A hand reached down calmly and picked it up. That one almost made a clean getaway. Missouri looked up. A man stood beside her, holding the orange carefully in one hand. Tall, dark coat, rain dripping lightly from his sleeves. Not movie star handsome. Better. The kind of face that became more interesting the longer you looked at it. His expression stayed calm, but there was something quietly tired in his eyes. Missouri laughed softly before she could stop herself. "Well," she said, "at least one of us survived this situation with dignity." The man glanced down at the soaked oranges surrounding them. I wouldn't say dignity. One just attacked my shoe. That made her laugh harder. He crouched beside her without hesitation and started gathering the remaining oranges before they rolled farther away. You don't have to help, Missouri said. You look outnumbered. That obvious? One orange made it to the next parking row. I'd say yes. Missouri smiled despite herself. Most people in Briarwood rushed through storms with their heads down, focused only on themselves. This man had stopped without acting irritated about it. That alone felt unusually kind. He placed 2 rescued oranges carefully back into the surviving grocery bag before looking at the ripped bottom. This bag gave up on life. It carried too much. Relatable. Another small laugh escaped her. Something about him felt easy. Not overly charming, not trying too hard, just calm. He picked up the final orange near the curb before standing again. You parked far? 3 rows over. He looked toward the rain pouring harder across the parking lot. You're not making it there dry. I figured that out already. Without asking permission, he grabbed 2 grocery bags from her hands. Missouri blinked. You really don't have to do that. I know, but you're still doing it? You've had a long day. The simple certainty in his voice caught her off guard. How do you know that? You've got hospital scrubs under your hoodie, he said. And you look one minor inconvenience away from fighting a shopping cart. Missouri pointed at him. That cart knew what it did. For the first time, he smiled fully, and suddenly she understood something dangerous. This man had one of those smiles capable of lowering defenses without permission. They started walking through the rain together toward the far end of the parking lot. Water splashed beneath their shoes while headlights swept across the wet pavement nearby. Missouri shifted the broken umbrella awkwardly above them. It's not doing much, she admitted. No, he agreed. But emotionally it's trying its best. She laughed again. The strange thing was how natural the conversation felt. No awkward pauses, no forced flirting, no performance. Just 2 exhausted adults talking like they'd met before somewhere. When they finally reached her car, Missouri unlocked the trunk and looked over at him. Thank you, she said sincerely. Most people would have pretended not to notice me losing a battle with fruit. I considered it, he replied calmly. But the oranges deserve better. She shook her head, smiling. You always rescue strangers in parking lots? Only the dramatic ones. Missouri leaned lightly against the car door. Well, dramatic stranger appreciates it. For a second, neither moved. Rain tapped steadily against the roof of the car, while distant thunder rolled across Briarwood again. The man finally extended his hand. Jeffrey, Missouri. His eyebrows lifted slightly. Missouri. My mom loves state names. I was expecting maybe Georgia. She says Missouri sounded stronger. Was she right? Missouri smiled faintly. Depends who you ask. Jeffrey looked at her for half a second longer than necessary. Not in a rude way. More like he was quietly trying to understand her. Then he nodded toward the ripped grocery bag. You should probably get home before the rest of those oranges attempt freedom again. Missouri laughed softly. Probably. Neither of them moved immediately, and both noticed it. Finally, Jeffrey stepped backward slowly. Well, good luck with the surviving fruit. Missouri opened the driver's door. Thanks again. He gave a small nod before turning toward the parking lot. Missouri climbed into the car and shut the door. But instead of driving away immediately, she watched him through the windshield. Jeffrey walked calmly through the rain with his hands in his coat pockets, completely unaware she was still looking at him. Or maybe he knew, because just before reaching his car, he glanced back once, only once, then drove away. Missouri sat there for another few seconds staring at the empty parking space afterward. Then she looked down at the rescued oranges beside her and smiled to herself without understanding why. The next evening, Missouri saw him again, not because fate magically placed them together, because Jeffrey Schoen had returned to Harper's Market at almost the exact same time, hoping she might walk through those doors again. And when she did, his entire face changed before he could hide it. Missouri stopped pushing her cart. You stalk all women with dangerous grocery bags? Jeffrey looked completely serious. Only repeat offenders. She laughed immediately. And somehow, that second conversation lasted almost an hour. Over the next few weeks, Harper's Market quietly became their place without either of them admitting it out loud. Sometimes Jeffrey arrived first, pretending to compare coffee brands he never planned to buy. Sometimes Missouri wandered through produce aisles much longer than necessary while pretending she absolutely needed to inspect strawberries one by one. Neither mentioned it, but both noticed. One Thursday evening, Missouri spotted him near the frozen foods section staring at two different pizza boxes with unusual concentration. She stopped beside him. "That looks serious." Jeffrey glanced over calmly. "I'm making an important life decision. Pepperoni or cheese? See? You understand the pressure." Missouri folded her arms thoughtfully. "Depends." "On what? How emotionally stable are you tonight?" Jeffrey stared at her for a second, then laughed quietly under his breath. That laugh surprised her every time. Most people who looked as composed as Jeffrey usually guarded themselves carefully, but whenever he laughed genuinely, something softer slipped through. Missouri pointed at the pepperoni box. "That one. Excellent choice. You were already holding it. I wanted professional confirmation from a pediatric nurse. You people keep tiny humans alive. I trust your judgment." She smiled before reaching for orange juice nearby. Jeffrey noticed immediately. "You really like oranges." Missouri looked down at the carton in her hand. "Maybe I'm still emotionally attached after the parking lot disaster. Trauma bonding with fruit. Dangerous path. Yet here you are encouraging it." The cashier nearby chuckled while scanning groceries. It felt strangely easy being around him. No pressure, no games, no exhausting performances. After years of rushed schedules and emotionally unavailable men, Missouri found herself looking forward to these accidental meetings more than she wanted to admit. And Jeffrey. Jeffrey started rearranging entire evenings around them. A week later, they ended up sitting across from each other at Rosie's diner after Jeffrey casually asked, "So are we going to keep pretending these grocery store meetings are random?" Missouri stirred whipped cream into her milkshake. "I haven't decided yet. Take your time. You seem confident. I bought you fries. Statistically, my chances improved." She laughed softly. The diner glowed warmly around them while old country songs played low through overhead speakers. Outside, Briarwood moved at its usual slow pace. Inside, something small and important quietly began growing between them. Jeffrey leaned back slightly in the booth. "So," he asked, "what's the worst part about your job?" Missouri exhaled slowly. "The parents. The kids aren't. The kids are brave." Her voice softened. "Most adults fall apart before they do." Jeffrey watched her carefully while she spoke, noticing the way her expression changed whenever she talked about work. She cared deeply. Honestly, that kind of kindness felt unfamiliar to him now. Missouri pointed toward him with a fry. "Your turn." "My turn what?" "Worst part of your job." Jeffrey hesitated briefly. He had become very skilled at giving partial truths. "Meetings, that's your answer?" "Absolutely. No dramatic stories. No office warfare." "You seem disappointed. I expected at least one enemy named Richard." Jeffrey smiled. "There's always a Richard." Missouri laughed again, and for the first time in months. Jeffrey forgot to be guarded. That scared him more than it should have, because peace had become unfamiliar territory. Most people treated him differently the moment they learned who he really was. Some became overly impressed. Others became calculating. Even his former fiancée had spent years pretending to love him while secretly using his name, his money, and his connections to build her own escape plan. Jeffrey still remembered the humiliation of discovering she'd emptied private accounts while sleeping beside him every night pretending everything was normal. Since then, trust felt dangerous. But Missouri looked at him like none of those things mattered. She never asked expensive questions, never hinted about wealth, never cared about status. When she looked at him, she just saw him, and somehow that felt more frightening than being lied to. A waitress passed their booth carrying fresh pie slices while Missouri dipped another fry into ketchup. "You're thinking too hard again." Jeffrey blinked slightly. "What?" "That thing you do," she pointed at him, "where your eyebrows get all serious and you disappear into your own head." "I do not do that. You're literally doing it right now." He opened his mouth to argue, then stopped, because she was right. Missouri smiled victoriously. "Thought so." Jeffrey shook his head quietly. "You notice everything. Occupational hazard." For a moment they simply looked at each other across the table while conversation buzzed softly around them. No dramatic music, no lightning strikes, no grand declarations, just comfort. The kind people accidentally spend years searching for. Later that night, Jeffrey walked Missouri to her apartment building downtown. The sidewalks still glistened from earlier rain while glowing shop signs reflected across puddles near the curb. Missouri shoved her hands deeper into her hoodie pockets. "You know," she said, "you still haven't explained what you actually do." Jeffrey looked ahead casually. "Construction management? Wow. What? That sounded unbelievably boring. It's very exciting to emotionally stable people. She bumped his arm lightly. You definitely rehearse these responses. Only the good ones. Missouri laughed under her breath. When they reached her apartment entrance, neither rushed the goodbye. Jeffrey stood with his hands inside his coat pockets while Missouri leaned lightly against the doorway. You free Friday? He asked. Missouri pretended to think carefully. Depends. On? How many fries are involved? I can work with that. She smiled softly. And Jeffrey realized something uncomfortable in that exact moment. He was already looking forward to Friday more than he should have been. Missouri stepped backward toward the entrance. Well, good night, construction management. Jeffrey nodded once. Good night, dramatic grocery woman. She laughed while disappearing inside. Jeffrey stayed there another few seconds after the door closed, then finally looked up toward her apartment window. A light turned on moments later, and against his better judgment, he smiled to himself the entire drive home. Friday arrived with crowded sidewalks, live music drifting through downtown Briarwood, and Missouri running almost 20 minutes late. By the time she hurried toward Rosie's diner, she looked completely exhausted. Her hair was barely cooperating. One shoelace had come loose, and someone at the hospital had spilled apple juice down the sleeve of her hoodie an hour earlier. Perfect. She pushed open the diner door breathlessly and immediately spotted Jeffrey sitting in their usual booth near the window. He looked up from the menu the second she walked in, then smiled. Not politely, not casually, the kind of smile that made it painfully obvious he'd been watching the door waiting for her. Missouri slid into the booth across from him. If you say nice of you to join me, I'm leaving. Jeffrey calmly folded the menu closed. I was actually going to ask if you fought someone on the way here. That bad? You look emotionally exhausted. I had a 6-year-old bite a doctor today. Jeffrey blinked once. The doctor deserved it? That's what the kid said. A laugh escaped him before he could stop it. Missouri pointed proudly. There it is. What? The laugh. Jeffrey leaned back slightly. You study me way too much. You hide things way too much. For a brief second, something shifted behind his eyes. Small, quick, almost invisible. Missouri noticed anyway. But before she could say anything, Rosie appeared carrying 2 milkshakes. 1 chocolate, 1 strawberry. Same as usual. Jeffrey looked surprised. Usual? Rosie rolled her eyes dramatically. Honey, this diner survives entirely on routine and gossip. Missouri laughed into her straw while Rosie walked away again. Jeffrey shook his head quietly. You know everybody in this town. No, Missouri corrected. Everybody knows Rosie. That turned into another easy conversation, then another, and another. Somehow hours disappeared without either noticing. They talked about childhood memories, terrible first jobs, favorite movies, embarrassing school stories, and whether pineapple belonged on pizza. Missouri took the topic very seriously. You cannot put tropical fruit on something Italian and call it normal behavior. Jeffrey looked offended. You sound judgmental. I am judgmental. You'd abandon me over pizza? I'd tell the police first. Jeffrey laughed again, and every time he did, Missouri noticed the same thing. He seemed lighter around her, less guarded, like he forgot to carry whatever invisible weight followed him everywhere else. At one point she caught him watching her quietly while she spoke. What? Nothing. That was definitely a something face. Jeffrey looked down briefly toward his untouched fries, then back at her. You make ordinary things feel important. The words caught her off guard. Missouri's teasing expression softened slightly. That's either really sweet or incredibly confusing. It sounded better in my head. No, she admitted quietly. I think I liked it. For a moment neither looked away. The noise of the diner blurred gently around them while something warmer settled between the silence. Not rushed, not dramatic, real. And maybe that's what frightened Jeffrey most, because real things could hurt you. He learned that lesson years ago. His father used to trust people too easily. Employees, business partners, friends. Then one bad investment destroyed almost everything their family had built. Jeffrey still remembered hearing his father cry behind a locked office door after discovering people he trusted had quietly emptied accounts and disappeared. After that, Jeffrey promised himself he would never become vulnerable enough for someone to destroy him financially or emotionally. Then came Vanessa, beautiful, charming, careful. She spent 3 years loving him publicly while secretly planning a life somewhere else with another man. Jeffrey discovered everything accidentally through bank records and hidden messages. Since then, trust always came with suspicion attached. But sitting across from Missouri now, watching her argue passionately about pizza toppings while stealing fries off his plate, he caught himself forgetting those fears for small moments at a time, and forgetting felt dangerous. Outside, downtown Briarwood buzzed with Friday night energy while headlights moved slowly past the diner windows. Inside the booth, Missouri suddenly narrowed her eyes suspiciously. "You're doing it again." Jeffrey looked up. "Doing what?" "Thinking too hard. You keep accusing me of this because you disappear into your own head like an old man staring out a rainy window in a sad movie." Jeffrey smirked faintly. That was weirdly specific. "I have range." He shook his head quietly, then finally asked, "Can I tell you something honest?" Missouri rested her chin lightly against her hand. "That depends how alarming it is." Jeffrey hesitated briefly, which almost never happened around other people, but somehow honesty felt easier with her. "I usually hate dinners like this." Missouri frowned slightly. "With me?" "No." He looked at her carefully. "With anyone." That answer landed differently than flirtation would have, because she could hear the truth inside it. Jeffrey wasn't a lonely man socially. He was lonely emotionally. There was a difference. Missouri's voice softened. "Well, I'm glad you came anyway." Jeffrey held her gaze for a second longer than normal, and somewhere quietly beneath the conversation, beneath the laughter, beneath the teasing, both of them realized this was becoming something important. Neither said it out loud, but both felt it. Later that night, they walked slowly through downtown after the diner closed. Storefront lights glowed softly across the sidewalks while music drifted from a nearby bar farther down the street. Missouri hugged her hoodie tighter against the cool air. "You know," she said, "you still seem mysterious." Jeffrey sighed dramatically. "I told you my thrilling construction management story. You gave me the world's safest answer. It's technically true." "That sounds suspicious already." Jeffrey smiled to himself. Missouri glanced sideways at him. "What?" "You smile differently now." He looked genuinely confused. "There are multiple versions?" "Yes. That feels insulting." The fake polite smile disappears faster. "And the other one?" Missouri thought for a second. "The real one stays longer." Jeffrey looked ahead quietly after that. Because somehow, that observation affected him more than it should have. When they finally reached her apartment building again, Missouri stopped near the entrance steps. For once, neither joked immediately. The moment felt quieter tonight, more personal somehow. Jeffrey slid one hand into his coat pocket. "You working tomorrow?" "Unfortunately." "What time?" 6 in the morning. "That should be illegal." "I agree." A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Then before he could overthink it, he asked, "Want me to bring you coffee during your break?" Missouri blinked slightly. "You'd drive across town just to bring me coffee?" Jeffrey shrugged once. "You seem worth mild inconvenience." She laughed softly, but her expression gentled afterward. "Nobody's ever done that before." Jeffrey didn't know why that sentence bothered him. Maybe because it sounded true. Maybe because someone should have already. Missouri stepped backward toward the apartment door. "Well, good night, mysterious construction man." Jeffrey nodded. "Good night, pizza judgment woman." She smiled while disappearing inside again. And once more, Jeffrey stayed there longer than necessary after she left. The next morning, Missouri fully expected Jeffrey to forget about the coffee. Not because he seemed unreliable, because people said thoughtful things all the time and rarely followed through, especially adults. By noon, the pediatric wing at Briarwood Children's Hospital had already become complete chaos. One toddler refused medicine unless every nurse barked like a dog first. A little boy hid crayons inside a blood pressure machine. And somebody's grandmother kept flirting aggressively with one of the interns. Missouri barely had time to breathe between patient rooms. By the time her lunch break finally arrived, she collapsed into a chair inside the staff lounge and groaned dramatically. Nurse Kelly looked up from her salad. "You look deceased." "I might actually be deceased." "Rough morning?" "One child licked my arm to avoid getting a vaccine." Kelly blinked slowly. "Did it work?" For a second, the lounge door opened before Missouri could continue complaining. And suddenly, Kelly's eyebrows shot upward. "Well," she whispered immediately, "that man definitely moisturizes." Missouri turned around. Jeffrey stood near the doorway holding a cardboard drink tray with 2 coffees and a paper bag from Rosie's Diner. His dark coat hung neatly over one arm while several nurses instantly pretended not to stare at him. Too late. They were absolutely staring. Jeffrey's eyes found Missouri immediately. And just like last night, that calm expression softened the second he saw her. Missouri blinked in surprise. "You actually came." Jeffrey walked over casually. "You sound disappointed." "I'm shocked. That feels slightly rude." Kelly stood up so fast her chair nearly tipped backward. "Well," she announced loudly, grabbing her salad, "suddenly I remember I have absolutely nowhere to be." Missouri narrowed her eyes. Kelly, goodbye, Missouri. Then she vanished from the lounge with the speed of a criminal fleeing a scene. Jeffrey sat across from Missouri while sliding one coffee toward her. I guess caramel? Missouri stared at the cup, then at him, then back at the cup again. How did you know my order? You order the same thing every diner visit. You notice that? You notice everything about me, Jeffrey replied calmly. Feels fair. Missouri tried not to smile, failed immediately. She opened the paper bag. Please tell me those are fries, hospital-grade emotional support fries. Missouri placed a hand dramatically against her chest. I knew there was goodness left in this world. Jeffrey laughed quietly while she stole one immediately. For several minutes, they simply sat there talking while hospital staff passed through the hallway outside. It felt strangely normal, comfortable, like they'd already known each other longer than they actually had. Missouri leaned back in her chair while sipping coffee carefully. You know, she admitted, this may be the nicest thing anyone's done for me in a while. Jeffrey looked down briefly at his own coffee. That's probably not a good sign. I work 70 hours a week around screaming children. She pointed at the fries. This counts as luxury now. He smiled faintly. You make hard things sound easy. Missouri shook her head. No, I just don't complain much. Jeffrey studied her quietly after that. Because he noticed something important. Missouri carried exhaustion differently than most people. Not dramatically, not bitterly. She simply kept going. Like stopping wasn't an option she allowed herself to consider. A loud crash suddenly echoed from somewhere down the hallway, followed by a child screaming, "It was an accident." Missouri immediately sighed. That sentence never means good news here. Jeffrey smiled into his coffee. A second later, a tiny girl wearing oversized hospital socks appeared in the lounge doorway holding a stuffed giraffe. She spotted Missouri instantly. There you are. Missouri's entire expression changed, softened instantly. Hey, Olivia. The little girl walked inside before noticing Jeffrey sitting nearby. Her eyes narrowed suspiciously. Who's that? Jeffrey looked mildly alarmed. Missouri fought a smile. Olivia, this is my friend Jeffrey. Olivia kept staring. Helicopter. Jeffrey nearly choked on his coffee. Missouri burst into laughter so suddenly she had to cover her mouth. Olivia pointed directly at his coat. That jacket looks expensive. Jeffrey blinked twice. She's terrifying. She's observant, Missouri corrected proudly. Olivia stepped closer toward him while hugging the stuffed giraffe tightly. You rich? Missouri laughed harder. Olivia. What? The little girl asked innocently. I'm asking. Jeffrey somehow managed to answer with a straight face. I do okay. Olivia considered him carefully, then nodded once. You should buy Missouri better vending machine snacks. Jeffrey looked toward Missouri. She's got leadership qualities. She runs this floor emotionally. Olivia finally smiled slightly before reaching for a fry from the bag without permission. Thanks, she mumbled before walking back toward the hallway. Jeffrey watched her leave, then looked back at Missouri. You're good with them. Missouri's expression softened again. They're usually scared. She shrugged lightly. Sometimes they just need someone calm nearby. Jeffrey stared at her quietly for a second, because once again, she said things that sounded simple while revealing something deeply kind underneath. Missouri noticed his expression. What? Nothing. That's becoming your favorite answer. Jeffrey leaned back slightly. I'm just trying to figure you out. And? You're difficult. Missouri smirked. That sounds like a compliment. It probably is. A comfortable silence settled briefly between them. Not awkward, warm, the kind that forms naturally between two people beginning to trust each other without realizing it. Then Missouri glanced toward the clock on the wall and groaned dramatically. My break's almost over. Jeffrey looked genuinely disappointed for half a second before masking it again. Missouri noticed anyway. You'll survive. Debatable. She laughed softly while standing. Jeffrey stood too. And for one strange moment, neither seemed eager for the conversation to end. Missouri adjusted the sleeves of her hoodie. Well, she said quietly, thanks for the coffee. Jeffrey nodded once. Thanks for allowing your tiny coworkers to interrogate me. She was evaluating your intentions. And? Missouri smiled faintly. You survived. Jeffrey slipped one hand into his coat pocket while looking at her carefully. Dinner tomorrow? Missouri pretended to think. Will there be fries? There will always be fries. Then probably. Jeffrey smiled again. The real smile this time. The one that stayed longer. And Missouri felt something shift inside her chest before she could stop it. Dinner the next night turned into a 3-hour conversation neither of them wanted to end. Then another dinner happened 3 days later, then coffee walks, then late-night phone calls that somehow stretched past midnight without either noticing the time. Little pieces of life slowly began blending together, and before long, Jeffrey Schoen became part of Missouri Turner's normal routine, which terrified him. One Wednesday evening, Missouri arrived at Rosie's diner still wearing hospital scrubs beneath an oversized cardigan. The second she slid into the booth, she dropped her forehead dramatically onto the table. Jeffrey lowered his menu slightly. "Should I call emergency services?" "I am emergency services," she mumbled into the table. "That feels unhelpful." Missouri lifted her head just enough to glare at him weakly. "A child threw mashed potatoes at me today." "That's not ideal," he yelled freedom first. Jeffrey laughed quietly while sliding a milkshake toward her. "You pre-ordered?" she asked suspiciously. "You looked emotionally unstable when you walked in. You say the sweetest things." She took a sip immediately before closing her eyes. "Okay, wow, what? That just repaired part of my personality." Jeffrey smiled faintly while watching her. It had become his favorite thing lately, watching her exist, the way she talked with her hands whenever she got excited, the way she laughed without trying to sound polished, the way she somehow made ordinary conversations feel lighter. Missouri noticed him staring. "You're doing the quiet thing again." "What quiet thing?" "The one where you look like you're solving emotional algebra." Jeffrey shook his head under his breath. "You invent strange phrases. You secretly enjoy them." He didn't deny it. Rosie arrived carrying burgers and fries before pointing between them dramatically. "I just want credit when y'all get married someday." Missouri nearly inhaled her milkshake wrong. "Rosie." Jeffrey calmly reached for a fry. "She moves fast." Rosie winked. "At my age, you stop wasting time." Then she walked away proudly. Missouri covered her face briefly with both hands. "Oh my God!" Jeffrey looked suspiciously entertained. "You handled that surprisingly well." "I've learned resisting Rosie only encourages her." Missouri peeked through her fingers. "You're enjoying this too much." "A little." She shook her head while trying not to laugh. But underneath the teasing, something softer lingered now between them, something impossible to ignore anymore. Later that evening, after dinner ended, neither wanted to go home yet. So they walked slowly through downtown Briarwood while storefront lights reflected across the sidewalks. A local musician played guitar outside a bookstore farther down the street, while couples wandered between restaurants nearby. Missouri shoved her hands into her cardigan pockets. "You know what's weird?" Jeffrey glanced sideways at her. "What?" "You still feel mysterious. I've told you many things, not important things. That sounds judgmental." "You dodge questions professionally." Jeffrey looked ahead quietly for a second, because she wasn't wrong. Most people only knew polished versions of him, controlled versions. But Missouri kept slipping past those walls without trying. She never pushed aggressively, never demanded answers. She simply noticed things, which somehow made hiding harder. Missouri nudged his arm lightly. "See? There you go again." "What?" "Disappearing into your head." Jeffrey exhaled quietly. "Bad habit. You trust people too carefully." The words surprised him enough that he stopped walking briefly. Missouri noticed immediately. "Was I wrong?" Jeffrey looked toward the glowing shop windows nearby before answering. "No." His voice sounded quieter now, more honest. They continued walking slowly. For a while neither spoke. Then finally Jeffrey asked, "How'd you figure that out?" Missouri shrugged lightly. "You watch people before relaxing around them. That's normal." "No." She looked at him carefully. "That's survival." Jeffrey stared ahead silently after that, because nobody usually noticed things like that. Most people saw confidence when they looked at him. Control, success, distance. Missouri saw caution, and somehow that made him feel exposed in a way he wasn't used to. After a moment she bumped his shoulder gently. "You don't have to tell me everything." Jeffrey looked at her. "Then why ask questions?" Missouri smiled faintly. "Because I like knowing you." Simple answer. No pressure attached. And somehow that made it worse. Or maybe better. Jeffrey still couldn't decide. They eventually stopped near the Riverwalk overlooking the dark water stretching beneath Briarwood's bridge lights. The city felt quieter here, more private. Missouri leaned lightly against the railing while cool air moved through the street below. Jeffrey stood beside her with both hands inside his coat pockets. For several seconds neither spoke. Then Missouri suddenly smiled to herself. "What?" She glanced sideways at him. "I just realized something. That sounds dangerous. You've never once asked me out properly." Jeffrey blinked. "What?" You just appear places with food. That's worked surprisingly well so far. Missouri laughed softly. Then she looked back toward the water again. Still, Jeffrey studied her profile quietly. The city lights reflected softly in her eyes while loose curls shifted gently near her cheeks. And before he could overthink it, he asked, "Missouri Turner, would you like to go on an actual date with me Friday night?" She pretended to consider carefully. "Will there be fries?" Jeffrey sighed dramatically. "You make romance difficult. Answer the question. Yes, there will be fries." "Then yes." Jeffrey laughed quietly. And for the first time in a very long time, something inside him felt calm. Not distracted, not guarded, just calm. Moment. You know what's strange? What? Everything feels quieter when I'm around you. Jeffrey's expression shifted slightly, because nobody had ever said something like that to him before. Not without wanting something attached to it. Missouri wasn't trying to impress him, wasn't performing. She simply meant it, and that honesty hit harder than she realized. Jeffrey looked away briefly toward the river below, because suddenly the idea of losing this someday felt terrifying. Friday night arrived warmer than expected, and for the first time in years Jeffrey changed shirts 3 different times before leaving his apartment. He stared at himself in the mirror afterward with mild irritation. "This is embarrassing," he muttered, "because this wasn't supposed to happen. He wasn't supposed to care this much about one woman smiling at him across a diner table. But somehow Missouri had quietly become the best part of his days, and now he was nervous, actually nervous. By the time he pulled up outside her apartment building downtown, he had already checked the time on his dashboard at least 6 times. Then Missouri stepped outside, and every coherent thought disappeared immediately. She wore dark jeans, simple boots, and a soft cream-colored sweater beneath a long coat. Nothing flashy, nothing dramatic. Still, Jeffrey forgot how to breathe for half a second. Missouri stopped near the passenger side window and grinned. "You look stressed." Jeffrey blinked once. "That's your opening sentence? You changed shirts multiple times, didn't you?" His eyes narrowed suspiciously. "How are you doing this? You've got nervous eyebrows." "That's not a thing. It absolutely is." Jeffrey sighed while unlocking the door. "Get in the car." Missouri laughed softly before climbing inside. The entire drive downtown felt strangely easy despite the tension quietly building between them. They talked about terrible music choices, weird hospital stories, childhood Halloween costumes, and why Jeffrey apparently hated karaoke with deep emotional commitment. "I'm protecting the public," he explained seriously. "That bad? You'd evacuate buildings?" Missouri grinned. "Now I want to hear it. That will never happen. We'll see." Jeffrey shook his head under his breath while stopping at a red light. Then he glanced toward her briefly, and once again found himself smiling without meaning to. Dinner happened at a smaller restaurant this time, not Rosie's. Low-hanging lights glowed warmly above polished wooden tables while quiet jazz drifted through the room. Missouri looked around curiously after they sat down. "This feels fancy." Jeffrey reached for the menu. "It has cloth napkins. That's how they trap you." She smiled. "You clean up nice. Construction management. You still don't believe my incredibly boring career story. You say construction management like you practiced it in front of a mirror. That's ridiculous. You definitely did." Jeffrey tried not to laugh. Failed immediately. Their waiter approached with waters while Missouri leaned slightly closer across the table. "Can I ask you something serious?" Jeffrey's stomach tightened slightly. "You can ask. What's the deal with you and trust?" The question landed gently, but directly. Jeffrey looked down briefly toward the table. Most people ask questions carelessly. Missouri asked carefully. That difference mattered. He rested one hand loosely near his glass before answering. "I've trusted the wrong people before." Missouri stayed quiet, letting him continue if he wanted, not forcing it. Jeffrey noticed that too. "My father lost almost everything when I was younger because he believed people who lied to him." His voice remained calm but quieter now. "After that, he spent years trying to rebuild." Missouri watched him carefully. "And then," Jeffrey continued slowly, "someone I planned to marry turned out to be very good at pretending." Missouri's expression softened immediately. Jeffrey rarely talked about this out loud, almost never, but somehow sitting across from her made honesty feel less dangerous than usual. "She stole from you?" Missouri asked carefully. Jeffrey gave a small nod. "For a while, actually." Missouri leaned back slightly, processing that. Then finally she said, "That explains the nervous eyebrows." Jeffrey laughed unexpectedly. A real laugh. And just like that, the heaviness loosened slightly again. Missouri smiled softly. You know what I think? What? I think bad people convinced you that kindness makes someone weak. Jeffrey looked at her quietly. No, she continued gently, it makes them dangerous. Because kind people survive things without becoming cruel. That sentence stayed with him. Long after the waiter brought food, long after the conversation shifted again, long after Missouri laughed at him for ordering expensive steak while still stealing fries off her own plate first. At one point during dinner, Jeffrey caught himself simply watching her while she spoke about a little girl at the hospital who insisted crayons could heal people faster than medicine. Missouri animatedly explained, and then she told the doctor his haircut looked emotionally upsetting. Jeffrey nearly choked laughing. She said that to a surgeon? With confidence. That child fears nothing. She's honestly iconic. Jeffrey shook his head while smiling. Then suddenly he realized something quietly terrifying. He hadn't thought about work once all evening. Not emails, not meetings, not investors, just her. And for a man whose entire life revolved around control, that realization felt dangerous. After dinner, they walked slowly through downtown again while music drifted from nearby bars and restaurants. Missouri held the collar of her coat closed against the cool night air. You're quieter tonight, she noticed. Jeffrey looked ahead, thinking, there it is again. What? The disappearing thing? Jeffrey smiled faintly. Maybe I just like listening to you. That sounded smooth. It wasn't supposed to. Missouri bumped his arm lightly. They continued walking another block before stopping outside a closed bookstore with glowing string lights wrapped around the windows. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence between them felt different tonight. Closer. Missouri looked up at him carefully. Can I ask one more question? Jeffrey nodded slowly. What scares you most? The answer came too quickly. Losing good things. Missouri's expression softened instantly. Not pity, understanding. And somehow that almost made it harder to breathe. She stepped slightly closer without realizing she'd done it. Jeffrey noticed immediately. So did she. Neither moved away. The city sounds blurred softly around them, while tension quietly settled into the small space between them. Missouri looked down briefly before smiling nervously. You know, for someone mysterious, you're getting surprisingly honest. Jeffrey looked at her for a long second, then finally admitted softly, You make me want to be. And that was the exact moment everything between them changed. For the next several weeks, Jeffrey and Missouri slipped into each other's lives so naturally it almost felt accidental. But it wasn't. They were choosing each other now, quietly, repeatedly, every day. Jeffrey started showing up at the hospital with coffee often enough that half the pediatric staff already knew his order before he walked inside. Missouri started keeping extra fries on her plate automatically because somehow Jeffrey always stole at least 3. And slowly, without either planning it, mattering more than grand ones. One Sunday afternoon, Missouri came home from a brutal shift to find Jeffrey sitting on the steps outside her apartment building holding a paper bag from Rosie's diner. She stopped halfway down the sidewalk. You've become emotionally attached to this restaurant. Jeffrey looked up calmly. The waitress threatened me if I stopped visiting. That sounds like Rosie. Missouri climbed the steps slowly while exhaustion dragged through every movement. Jeffrey noticed immediately. Tough day? Missouri dropped beside him heavily. A 6-year-old threw up directly into my shoe. Jeffrey winced. That feels personal. It was absolutely personal. He handed her the bag. Missouri opened it and gasped dramatically. Curly fries. I'm basically a hero. You actually might be. Jeffrey smiled while watching her steal one immediately. There was something deeply peaceful about these moments with her. No pretending, no strategy, no pressure, just comfort. Missouri leaned lightly against his shoulder while eating. Neither commented on it, but Jeffrey felt his heartbeat change instantly anyway. You smell like French fries, she mumbled. You say that like it's negative. It's honestly improving your personality. Jeffrey laughed softly beneath his breath. A few seconds later, Missouri looked up toward the darkening sky above downtown Briarwood. You ever think life gets weird? Often. Like, she paused thoughtfully. You spend years meeting the wrong people. Then suddenly one random grocery disaster changes everything. Jeffrey glanced sideways at her. You're still blaming the oranges for this? They started it. Jeffrey smiled faintly before looking ahead again. But inwardly, her words affected him more than she realized. Because she was becoming important to him now in ways he hadn't expected. Important enough to frighten him. That fear returned strongest whenever money entered conversations around other people. At business events, investors constantly asked when he planned to settle down again. Friends joked carelessly about women wanting access to his wealth. Even his own business partner, Leonard, refused to believe genuine relationships still existed for men like them. One evening after a meeting downtown, Leonard loosened his tie while stepping into the elevator beside Jeffrey. "So?" Leonard asked casually. "Still seeing the nurse?" Jeffrey glanced toward him briefly. "Missouri." "Right." The elevator doors slid shut. Leonard smirked slightly. "She know who you really are yet?" Jeffrey's jaw tightened faintly. "Why?" "Just asking." "No, you weren't." Leonard shrugged carelessly. "Come on, Jeff. A woman meets a guy worth hundreds of millions and suddenly falls in love with construction management?" Jeffrey's expression hardened slightly. "She's not like that," Leonard chuckled once. "That's exactly what you said about Vanessa." Silence. Heavy silence. The elevator continued downward slowly while old memories forced themselves back into Jeffrey's mind. Vanessa smiling while lying to him. Bank statements, hidden accounts, public embarrassment. Leonard noticed the shift immediately. "All I'm saying is be careful." Jeffrey stared ahead quietly, because part of him hated that those words still affected him, and another part hated that fear still existed at all. That night, Jeffrey barely slept. By morning, he found himself replaying tiny moments differently. Missouri asking questions about his schedule. Missouri teasing him about mysterious answers. Missouri noticing expensive details he accidentally overlooked. Nothing suspicious, nothing manipulative. Yet fear has a cruel way of changing ordinary things into warning signs. And once doubt enters quietly, it rarely stays quiet for long. Meanwhile, Missouri remained completely unaware of the battle happening inside his head. A few nights later, she invited Jeffrey over to her apartment for dinner after another thunderstorm knocked out power across half the neighborhood. Jeffrey arrived carrying takeout containers, candles, and a flashlight. Missouri opened the apartment door, laughing. "Why do you look prepared for apocalypse? You said the electricity died. I said the lights went out. Not society." Jeffrey stepped inside while handing her the food bag. "You dramatically underestimate storms." Missouri smiled while lighting candles around the apartment. Warm golden light quickly filled the small living room, while thunder rolled softly outside. The apartment suddenly felt smaller, quieter, more intimate. Jeffrey loosened his coat slowly while looking around. "You actually cleaned," Missouri gasped. "Excuse you?" "There are usually at least 6 medical journals attacking the couch, their educational decorations." Jeffrey smiled faintly. They sat cross-legged on the floor, eating takeout beside candlelight, while rain tapped steadily against the windows. For once, neither rushed conversation. Silence settled naturally between them at times, comfortably. Missouri leaned back against the couch while watching candlelight flicker softly across the room. "You know what's strange?" she asked quietly. Jeffrey looked over. "What?" "Everything feels calmer when you're here." The honesty in her voice caught him completely off guard. Missouri wasn't trying to impress him. She simply meant it. Jeffrey looked down briefly at the food container in his hands, because suddenly his chest felt painfully tight. Nobody had ever made him feel important without wanting something attached to it afterward. But Missouri never asked for anything. Not money, not gifts, not status. Just presence. And maybe that's why he was beginning to love her. The realization hit hard enough that it frightened him immediately. Missouri noticed the silence. "What?" Jeffrey looked back up slowly, then shook his head once. Nothing, but this time, he was lying. A month later, Missouri discovered she was pregnant. The moment itself wasn't dramatic. No music, no cinematic speech, no instant tears. Just silence inside a tiny apartment bathroom at 6:30 in the morning. Missouri stared at the test in her hand while her heartbeat slowly climbed into panic territory. Then she looked at the second test beside the sink. Positive. Again. "Oh my God." She sat down carefully on the closed toilet lid while trying to process the sudden wave of emotions crashing through her chest. Shock first, then fear, then something softer, happiness, real happiness. A laugh escaped her before she could stop it. "Nobody prepared me for this," she whispered to herself. For several minutes, she simply sat there smiling in disbelief. Jeffrey was going to panic, not badly, not cruelly, just in that deeply serious way he did whenever life surprised him. Missouri could already picture it. The pacing, the overthinking, the nervous eyebrows. That thought made her laugh again. By the end of the week, the doctor confirmed what still felt impossible. Twins. Missouri stared at the ultrasound screen while her hands trembled slightly in her lap. 2? She repeated weakly. The doctor smiled warmly. 2. Missouri covered her mouth instantly, not because she was upset, because suddenly everything felt bigger, more real. 2 tiny heartbeats echoed softly through the room while emotion climbed painfully into her throat. Her babies. Her and Jeffrey's babies. The thought filled her chest so quickly it almost hurt. Driving home afterward, Missouri caught herself smiling at random stoplights like a person who'd completely lost control of her emotions. She didn't care. For the first time in years, the future looked beautiful. That evening she stopped at a small children's store downtown just to look, which turned into 20 minutes of staring emotionally at tiny socks, then tiny shoes, then tiny blankets. Missouri picked up a pair of ridiculously small sneakers and nearly cried immediately.
"This is becoming embarrassing," she muttered to herself. But deep down,
she was happy, truly happy. She wanted to tell Jeffrey immediately, but another part of her wanted to do it right. Not rushed between dinner conversations, not casually, something special. So she waited 2 more days while secretly planning how to surprise him. That decision changed everything. Because life has terrible timing sometimes. 2 afternoons later, Missouri sat inside the hospital waiting room during a short break between shifts. Exhaustion tugged heavily at her body while she absent-mindedly reached for a business magazine someone had left on the side table nearby. She barely looked at the cover at first, then froze instantly. Jeffrey's face stared back at her from the front page beneath bold black lettering. Jeffrey Schoen, the billion-dollar builder reshaping Alabama. Missouri blinked once, then again. The entire article suddenly blurred around the edges while disbelief settled heavily into her chest. Billion-dollar builder, Schoen Developments, owner. Missouri sat upright immediately and began reading faster. The article described luxury developments, commercial investments, private properties, and business acquisitions across multiple states. Photos showed Jeffrey shaking hands beside politicians and investors, standing in expensive suits at charity events, giving interviews. Missouri stared at the pages in complete shock. Construction management. Her stomach tightened slowly. Not because of the money, because he never told her, not once. By the time her shift ended that evening, confusion had mixed painfully with hurt. Jeffrey had shared stories about childhood fears, trust issues, his father, Vanessa. But not this. Why? Missouri drove home quietly with the magazine sitting on the passenger seat beside her. And for the first time since meeting him, doubt entered her thoughts. Not suspicion, just sadness, because honesty mattered to her, a lot. That night, Jeffrey arrived at her apartment carrying takeout and his usual calm expression. But the second Missouri opened the door, he sensed something was wrong. "You okay?" Missouri stepped aside silently, allowing him inside. Jeffrey immediately noticed the business magazine sitting on the kitchen counter, and everything inside him tightened instantly. There it is, the moment he always feared. Missouri crossed her arms gently. "You own Schoen Developments." Jeffrey set the food down slowly. "I was going to tell you." "When?" He hesitated. "Wrong move." Missouri's expression changed immediately. Not anger, disappointment. "You've known me for months." Jeffrey rubbed one hand slowly against the back of his neck. "It's complicated." "No," Missouri said quietly. "It really isn't." Silence stretched heavily between them. Jeffrey could already feel old fear beginning to crawl back into his chest. Vanessa smiling while hiding bank transfers, business partners laughing behind closed doors, people changing once they learned his net worth. Missouri stepped closer carefully. "Why didn't you trust me enough to tell me?" Jeffrey looked at her, really looked at her, and suddenly something dangerous happened. Fear became louder than reason, because now she knew, now everything could change. Missouri noticed the shift in his expression instantly. "Jeffrey," without speaking, she reached into her bag and carefully pulled out the ultrasound photo. Jeffrey frowned slightly. "What's that?" Missouri's nervous smile appeared despite everything else happening. For one tiny hopeful moment, she still believed this would fix things. "I was trying to surprise you," she said softly. Then she handed him the photo. Jeffrey looked down and felt his entire body go cold. 2 tiny shapes, twins. Silence filled the apartment instantly. Missouri waited for happiness, shock, emotion. Instead, Jeffrey's chest tightened violently beneath the weight of every fear he thought he'd buried. Leonard's voice echoed inside his head. "You seriously think women don't know exactly who you are?" Missouri watched his expression slowly change. Confusion, fear, distance. Her smile faded immediately. "Jeffrey, say something." He looked up slowly. "When were you planning to tell me you knew who I really was?" Missouri blinked. "What? The magazine. I found out 2 days ago. That's convenient." The hurt on her face appeared instantly. Sharp, real, unfiltered. "What does that mean?" Jeffrey stared at the ultrasound picture again, then at her. His pulse hammered painfully. Every old wound, every betrayal, every humiliation, all crashing back at once, and instead of fighting the fear, he listened to it. Missouri stared at him in complete disbelief. "Jeffrey." But he stepped backward slightly before she could move closer. That small movement hurt more than shouting would have. The apartment suddenly felt colder, smaller. Jeffrey placed the ultrasound photo carefully onto the kitchen counter, like touching it too long might force him to feel something he wasn't ready to face. Missouri's voice lowered. "You think I planned this?" Jeffrey ran one hand across his jaw roughly. "I don't know what to think." "That's not true." Silence. Heavy silence. Because deep down, part of him did know. Part of him knew Missouri wasn't manipulative, knew she never chased money, knew she had loved him honestly from the beginning. But fear can make intelligent people behave stupidly, and Jeffrey was terrified. Missouri searched his face desperately now. "You really believe I stayed with you because of money?" Jeffrey looked away first. Wrong move again, because his silence answered for him. Missouri laughed once softly, not amused, heartbroken. "Wow." Jeffrey's chest tightened painfully. He wanted to fix this, wanted to say the right thing, but old damage was screaming louder than logic. "I've seen people pretend before," he said quietly. Missouri blinked slowly. "And you think I'm pretending?" "I think people change when money gets involved." Missouri shook her head in disbelief. "You think I got pregnant on purpose because I found out you were rich?" Jeffrey didn't answer immediately, and that hesitation destroyed whatever hope remained in her expression. Tears filled her eyes instantly. Not dramatic tears, the kind people try hard not to let fall. "You know what hurts the most?" she whispered. "I defended you." Jeffrey looked at her again. "When friends asked why you hid parts of yourself." Missouri continued quietly. "I told them maybe you just needed time." Her voice cracked slightly then. "And the whole time you were sitting there waiting for me to turn into somebody else." Jeffrey swallowed hard, because hearing the truth out loud sounded uglier than it did inside his own head. Missouri wiped quickly beneath one eye before tears could fully fall. "I loved you." The words landed hard enough to make his chest ache physically. Past tense. Loved. Jeffrey stepped forward instinctively. "Missouri, no." She backed away immediately. "Don't." He stopped. The distance between them suddenly felt enormous. Missouri looked toward the ultrasound photo sitting abandoned on the counter, then back at him, and for a second, Jeffrey saw something change inside her. Not anger, acceptance. Like she was realizing the man standing in front of her wasn't who she thought he was after all. That realization terrified him more than anything else tonight. He tried again. "I just need time to think." Missouri stared at him for several painful seconds, then finally asked the question quietly. "Do you think those babies are yours?" Jeffrey froze. One honest answer could still save everything. One. But fear spoke first again. "You're after my money," he said quietly. Missouri looked like the air had been knocked from her lungs. Jeffrey hated himself immediately after saying it. Immediately. But the damage was already done. Missouri's entire face changed. Every ounce of warmth she once looked at him with disappeared at once, not replaced by hatred. Something sadder. Disappointment. "You really believe that?" she whispered. Jeffrey opened his mouth. Nothing came out, because suddenly even he wasn't sure what he believed anymore. Missouri nodded slowly to herself like a person accepting painful truth. Then Jeffrey made the mistake that destroyed everything completely. "And I'm not raising another man's children." The silence afterward felt unbearable. Even the rain outside seemed quieter somehow. Missouri simply stared at him, not speaking, not moving, like she genuinely no longer recognized the man standing in her apartment. Jeffrey's breathing became uneven, because deep down, he knew he'd crossed a line that couldn't easily be repaired. Missouri finally looked down at the ultrasound photo again, then very carefully picked it up from the counter. Her hands trembled slightly now, But when she spoke again, her voice remained calm. That calmness hurt worse than yelling ever could. "One day," she whispered softly, "you're going to regret saying this." Jeffrey felt something twist painfully in his chest. Missouri slipped the ultrasound photo back into her bag slowly, then walked toward the apartment door. Jeffrey's panic surged instantly. He moved forward without thinking. "Missouri, wait." She stopped near the doorway but never turned around. For several seconds neither spoke. Then finally Missouri asked quietly, "Did you ever actually trust me?" Jeffrey stood frozen, because the answer should have been yes. But if it truly had been yes, none of this would be happening. Missouri laughed softly under her breath. "A broken sound. That's what I thought." Then she opened the apartment door and walked out. Just like that. Gone. The door closed gently behind her. No screaming, no dramatic scene, no shattered glass, only silence. Jeffrey stood alone in the middle of the apartment, staring at the empty doorway while regret arrived almost instantly. Fast, violent, merciless. His pulse hammered painfully against his ribs. "What did you just do?" He ran both hands through his hair before pacing once across the apartment. Then twice. Then he grabbed his phone immediately. Missouri's contact appeared on the screen. His thumb hovered over the call button. Press it. Fix this now. Apologize. But then the fear returned again. What if Leonard was right? What if he ignored the signs again? What if he became his father? What if he trusted someone who planned to destroy him? Jeffrey lowered the phone slowly. Minutes passed. Then another wave of guilt hit harder. He grabbed the phone again, stopped again, 3 different times, because pride is cruel, and fear is worse. Hours later, the untouched takeout food still sat cold on the kitchen counter while Jeffrey remained alone on the couch staring blankly ahead. The apartment felt different now, empty. At some point after midnight, he finally noticed something lying near the edge of the counter, the ultrasound photo. Missouri must have accidentally left behind one of the printed copies while packing her bag. Jeffrey picked it up slowly. The tiny, grainy image blurred slightly as emotion tightened painfully in his throat. Then his eyes landed near the bottom corner. 2 names written carefully in small handwriting. Ellie, Huey. Jeffrey sat there staring at those names for a very long time, and somewhere deep inside him, regret quietly began settling into place for good. 5 years passed, not quickly, not cleanly, the kind of years that leave people tired in ways sleep cannot fix. Missouri Turner learned that almost immediately after the twins were born. The delivery lasted nearly 18 exhausting hours. By the end of it, she looked half-conscious and emotionally destroyed. But the second the nurse carefully placed baby Ellie against her chest, everything else disappeared. Then came Huey, tiny, quiet, wide-eyed. Missouri cried instantly. Not delicate tears, full emotional collapse, because suddenly they were real. Her babies. The nurse smiled warmly while adjusting the blankets around them. "They're beautiful." Missouri looked down at the twins sleeping against her arms and whispered softly, "I know." But joy and exhaustion arrived together. The hospital bills piled up fast. Sleep disappeared almost completely, and caring for newborn twins alone felt overwhelming some nights, especially the nights when both babies cried at once while Missouri stood in the kitchen at 3 in the morning, trying not to cry with them. There were moments she almost called Jeffrey, moments she stared at his contact information late at night while rocking one of the twins back to sleep. But every time she remembered his words. Another man's children, that sentence never stopped hurting. So Missouri deleted the number eventually, and kept going, because she had no other choice. The twins grew quickly after that. Ellie learned to walk first, mostly because she was too stubborn to wait. Huey took longer, more careful, more observant. Even as toddlers, their personalities couldn't have been more different. Ellie talked constantly, to strangers, to cashiers, to dogs, to herself. Meanwhile, Huey preferred sitting quietly beside windows drawing shapes on paper while watching the world carefully. One afternoon, when the twins were almost 4, Missouri walked into the living room and froze slightly. Huey sat cross-legged on the floor, sketching buildings onto scrap paper with intense concentration. Tall windows, sharp rooftops, city skylines, exactly the way Jeffrey used to draw. Missouri's chest tightened painfully. Huey looked up. "Mom?" She forced a smile instantly. "What's that?" "A city." He proudly held up the paper. Missouri stared at the sketch a second longer than necessary, then nodded softly. "It's beautiful." Huey smiled shyly before returning to his drawing, and Missouri quietly stepped into the kitchen afterward just to breathe for a minute, because some reminders arrived without warning. Life in Briarwood settled into routine after that. Busy routine, exhausting routine, morning school drop-offs, hospital shifts, laundry, homework, bedtime stories. Missouri became excellent at functioning while tired. She packed lunches half awake, memorized school schedules, learned how to survive on coffee and determination. And despite everything, the twins grew up surrounded by love. Not luxury, not perfection. Love. Rosie from the diner became unofficial family. Nurse Kelly babysat during emergency shifts. Neighbors helped whenever Missouri worked late. People showed up for them. Still, some nights remained painfully lonely, especially after the twins fell asleep. That was usually when silence became dangerous. One evening, Missouri sat at the kitchen table paying bills while exhaustion pulled heavily beneath her eyes. The apartment remained quiet except for the soft hum of the refrigerator nearby. Then small footsteps padded into the room. Huey stood there holding his blanket. "Bad dream?" Missouri asked softly. He nodded sleepily before climbing into her lap. Missouri wrapped her arms around him immediately. For a minute neither spoke. Then Huey asked quietly, "Do you think our dad likes pancakes?" The question hit so suddenly Missouri almost stopped breathing. She kept her voice gentle anyway. "Probably." Huey rested sleepily against her shoulder. "Do you think he knows we exist?" Missouri closed her eyes briefly. Children had a way of asking devastating questions with complete innocence. "I think," she said carefully, "life gets complicated sometimes." Huey considered that answer seriously, then nodded once like it somehow made sense to him. A few seconds later, Ellie appeared in the doorway too, clutching her stuffed rabbit dramatically. "I heard pancakes." Missouri laughed softly despite herself. "Of course you did." Ellie climbed onto the other side of the couch beside them. "Can our dad make pancakes?" Missouri smiled faintly. "Maybe. Do you think he's tall?" "Yes. Cool." Then Ellie yawned loudly before falling half asleep against Missouri's shoulder within minutes. Missouri sat there holding both children quietly while emotion tightened painfully in her chest again. Because despite everything, part of her still remembered loving him, and sometimes that felt like its own kind of heartbreak. Meanwhile, across Briarwood, Jeffrey Schoen's life looked perfect from the outside. His company expanded rapidly over the years. New developments, magazine covers, interviews, awards. People respected him, envied him, admired him, but none of it fixed the silence waiting inside his penthouse every night. Jeffrey worked constantly now, too much, because staying busy distracted him from memory. Most relationships after Missouri never lasted longer than a few months. Not because people disliked him, because emotionally he remained somewhere else, even 5 years later. Sometimes late at night he still opened the drawer beside his bed where the ultrasound copy remained hidden beneath old paperwork. Ellie, Huey, those names never left him. Neither did the guilt. Leonard noticed eventually. One night after a company dinner, he leaned back in his chair while loosening his tie. "You still think about her?" Jeffrey stared down at his untouched drink. "Yes." Leonard sighed quietly. "Then why didn't you go after her?" Jeffrey laughed once bitterly. "With what explanation?" "The truth, maybe." Jeffrey looked away, because the truth sounded pathetic now. "I was afraid. I panicked. I destroyed everything myself." 5 years later, those reasons felt smaller than the damage they caused. One rainy evening, Jeffrey found himself driving through downtown Briarwood after another exhausting meeting. Traffic moved slowly beneath glowing streetlights, while tired music played quietly through the car speakers. Without realizing it immediately, he turned onto Maple Street, toward Rosie's diner, the same diner where Missouri used to steal fries from his plate while laughing at his serious expressions. Jeffrey parked silently outside. For a moment he almost drove away again. Then he noticed the rain beginning softly against the windshield, and suddenly memories hit harder than expected. Candlelight, milkshakes, her laugh, the way she used to say, "You're thinking too hard again." Jeffrey closed his eyes briefly, then finally stepped out into the rain and walked toward the diner door, completely unaware that everything was about to change. The bell above the diner door rang softly the moment Jeffrey stepped inside. Warm air wrapped around him instantly, along with the familiar smell of fries, coffee, and grilled onions. For a second nothing felt unusual. Rosie stood behind the counter, arguing lovingly with one of the cooks. Country music hummed low through overhead speakers. Customers filled booths beneath glowing yellow lights. Ordinary. Then Jeffrey heard a child's voice. "Mom, why does that man look exactly like me?" Everything inside him stopped. Slowly he turned toward the sound, and saw them. Missouri sat frozen inside the booth near the back window, while 2 children stared openly in his direction. Jeffrey's chest tightened so suddenly it physically hurt. The little boy looked exactly like him. Not similar, exact, same eyes, same serious expression, Same thoughtful stillness. Even the way the child tilted his head slightly while studying people felt painfully familiar. Jeffrey forgot the coffee cup in his hand completely. A few drops spilled across his fingers unnoticed. Then his gaze shifted toward the little girl beside him, and somehow that hurt too, because her face carried traces of him in softer ways, her smile, her blinking pattern, even the way she sat confidently inside the booth. 5 years collapsed instantly. Jeffrey could barely breathe. Missouri looked different too, still beautiful, but older in the way exhaustion changes kind people slowly over time. There were faint shadows beneath her eyes now, a deeper quietness in her expression. Life had clearly not been easy, and suddenly Jeffrey understood something horrifying. She did all of it alone, because of him. Ellie looked toward Huey excitedly. "I told you he looks like you." Huey kept staring carefully. Jeffrey noticed the sketch pad near the little boy's milkshake almost immediately. Buildings, tiny hand-drawn city buildings covered the page. His stomach dropped. Missouri finally spoke. "Huey," she said softly, "finish your dinner." Her voice remained calm. Too calm. The kind of calm people develop after surviving disappointment already. Jeffrey forced himself to move closer toward the booth. Each step felt strangely unreal, like his body was walking forward while his mind remained frozen somewhere behind. Ellie studied him boldly. "You look nervous." Jeffrey almost laughed from shock. Missouri closed her eyes briefly. "Ellie, what?" Ellie asked innocently. "He does." Jeffrey stopped beside the table, close enough now to see every tiny detail clearly. Huey's dark eyes lifted toward him again, thoughtful, quiet, observant. Jeffrey remembered seeing that same expression staring back at him in mirrors his entire life. His throat tightened painfully. Missouri looked up at him fully now, and what destroyed him wasn't anger. It was the absence of warmth, like she no longer expected anything from him at all. "You were wrong," she said quietly. Those 3 words landed harder than yelling ever could have. Jeffrey swallowed carefully, because there was nothing left to deny. The proof sat directly in front of him, holding crayons and a milkshake. Ellie leaned closer toward Missouri. "Mom," she whispered loudly, "why's he looking at us like that?" Missouri answered gently without taking her eyes off Jeffrey. "Because he's surprised." Jeffrey felt guilt crash through him all over again. Not the dull guilt he'd carried quietly for years. Fresh guilt, sharp guilt. The kind that leaves no room to escape yourself. Huey suddenly held up the sketch pad toward him. "I drew the courthouse downtown." Jeffrey blinked slightly before looking down at the drawing. The perspective lines, the windows, the structure details. It looked exactly like the kind of sketches Jeffrey used to fill notebooks with as a child. "That's..." Jeffrey's voice nearly failed him. "That's really good." Huey smiled faintly at the compliment, and something inside Jeffrey broke quietly right there, because that small smile should have belonged to years of memories already. Not this painful first meeting between strangers. Rosie appeared beside the booth carrying fresh fries before stopping abruptly. Her eyes widened immediately. "Oh." The single word carried full understanding. Rosie looked between Missouri and Jeffrey carefully, then toward the twins. "Oh, my Lord." Missouri rubbed her forehead tiredly. "Rosie, please." Rosie placed the fries down slowly while staring directly at Jeffrey. "You got some nerve showing up looking exactly like those babies." Jeffrey lowered his eyes briefly, because honestly, she wasn't wrong. Ellie reached immediately for fries. "Are these emotional support fries?" Rosie pointed proudly. "Exactly." Jeffrey blinked. Missouri sighed softly. "She says that about all fries now." The tiny normalness of the moment nearly destroyed him again. Because these children already had lives. Inside jokes. Memories. Without him. Huey looked back toward Jeffrey carefully. "What's your name?" The question hit harder than expected. Jeffrey looked at him quietly before answering. "Jeffrey." Ellie frowned thoughtfully. "That's fancy." Missouri nearly smiled despite herself. Jeffrey noticed immediately. Even now, seeing the smallest trace of her smile affected him. Huey glanced between them both slowly. "You know my mom." Not a question, an observation. Jeffrey nodded carefully. "Yes. How?" Missouri reached for her water glass slowly. But before she could answer, Ellie spoke first. "Maybe they used to date." Jeffrey almost choked on air. Missouri covered her eyes briefly. "Ellie, what?" she asked innocently again. "I watch television." Jeffrey laughed unexpectedly before he could stop himself. A real laugh. Small. Disbelieving. And for one painful second, Missouri remembered exactly how much she once loved hearing it. That realization annoyed her immediately. Jeffrey noticed her expression shift. The smile disappeared instantly. Distance returned. He looked down briefly toward the table, because suddenly he understood something important. The hardest part would not be proving those children were his. The hardest part would be proving he deserved to know them at all. Outside, rain continued sliding softly across the diner windows while warm light filled the little booth around them. And somewhere deep inside Jeffrey shone. Regret finally stopped being memory. Now it was real. Jeffrey barely slept that night. After leaving the diner, he sat inside his car for almost 40 minutes with the engine off while rain tapped steadily against the windshield. He couldn't stop seeing their faces. Huey's eyes, Ellie's smile, the sketch pad. Every tiny detail replayed endlessly inside his head. At one point, he pressed both hands against the steering wheel and shut his eyes tightly. "What did you do?" he whispered to himself. Because suddenly the full weight of 5 lost years felt unbearable. First steps, birthdays, nightmares, school plays, pancake mornings, gone. And he missed all of it. Not because someone kept him away. Because he chose fear over trust. That truth hurt worse than anything else. Meanwhile, back at the apartment, Missouri tucked the twins into bed carefully while trying to ignore the emotional exhaustion dragging through her chest. Ellie hugged her stuffed rabbit dramatically. "That man definitely knew you." Missouri adjusted her blanket gently. "You ask too many questions. I'm intelligent. You're nosy." Ellie smiled proudly. Across the room, Huey sat quietly on the edge of his bed holding the sketch pad from the diner. Missouri noticed immediately. "What's wrong, baby?" Huey looked down at the page thoughtfully. He looked sad. The words caught her off guard. Missouri sat beside him carefully. "Sometimes adults carry regrets." Huey frowned slightly. "What's regret?" Missouri hesitated. "How do you explain heartbreak to a 5-year-old? Finally, she answered softly. "It's when someone wishes they had made a different choice." Huey considered that seriously, then looked up again. "Do you know him?" Missouri's chest tightened. For years she rehearsed possible versions of this conversation in her head. None felt easier now. "A long time ago," she said carefully, "he was someone very important to me." Huey absorbed the answer quietly, then nodded once. Children accepted complicated truths more gently than adults sometimes. Ellie, however, immediately sat upright again. "I knew it." Missouri laughed despite herself. "You were supposed to be sleeping. I sensed emotional information. That's not a real thing. It should be." Missouri shook her head, smiling faintly before kissing Ellie's forehead. But after the twins finally fell asleep, the silence returned, and with it came memory. Jeffrey laughing over milkshakes, Jeffrey bringing coffee to the hospital, Jeffrey sitting beside candlelight during storms. Missouri leaned quietly against the kitchen counter afterward, while emotion tightened painfully in her chest. Seeing him tonight reopened wounds she thought had finally healed. The worst part? A small piece of her still recognized the man she once loved beneath all the regret sitting in his eyes. That frightened her, because forgiveness felt dangerous. Across town, Jeffrey finally walked into his penthouse sometime after midnight. The apartment remained perfectly clean, perfectly quiet, perfectly empty. He loosened his tie slowly before stopping near the kitchen counter. Then suddenly remembered something. Huey's sketch pad. The little boy had accidentally left behind one folded drawing near the diner booth. Jeffrey reached into his coat pocket and carefully pulled it out. A rough pencil sketch of downtown Briarwood filled the page. The courthouse, streetlights, buildings, and near the bottom corner, small handwriting, Huey Turner. Jeffrey stared at the name for a long moment before sitting heavily against the couch. Turner, not shown. Of course not. Guilt twisted sharply through his chest again, because he never earned the right for it to be anything else. The next morning, Jeffrey canceled 2 meetings for the first time in almost a year. Leonard noticed immediately. "You sick?" Jeffrey stood near the office windows overlooking downtown Birmingham while holding Huey's drawing in one hand. "No, you sound terrible." Jeffrey looked down at the sketch again. "I found them." Silence. Then Leonard slowly stood from his chair. "Them?" Jeffrey finally turned. "The twins." Leonard's expression shifted instantly. For the first time in years, he looked genuinely speechless. "You're serious?" Jeffrey nodded once. Leonard rubbed his jaw slowly. "Well," Jeffrey laughed bitterly. "Yeah, well, pretty much covers it. What happened?" Jeffrey looked away briefly. "They look exactly like me." Saying the words out loud made the regret even more real somehow. Leonard exhaled heavily. "Jeff, I know." "No," Leonard said quietly. "I don't think you do." Jeffrey looked back toward him. Leonard's voice lowered. "You accused that woman of lying about your children. Jeffrey's jaw tightened painfully. You think I forgot? I think you spent 5 years avoiding what that actually means. The silence afterward felt sharp. Because Leonard wasn't wrong. Jeffrey had carried guilt for years, but distance allowed guilt to stay abstract. Now there were faces attached to it. Voices, personalities, children. His children. Leonard looked down toward the sketch in Jeffrey's hand. What are you going to do? Jeffrey answered honestly. I don't know. And for maybe the first time in his adult life, that terrified him completely. Later that afternoon, Missouri arrived at Briarwood Elementary to pick up the twins after school. Ellie burst through the front doors, first carrying 3 papers, 1 broken crayon, and enough energy to power a small city. Mom, I got a gold star and Trevor cried during math. That feels unrelated. It's still important. Huey followed quietly behind her, carrying his backpack carefully over one shoulder. Then he suddenly stopped walking. Missouri frowned slightly. Huey? He pointed toward the sidewalk across the street. Missouri turned, and her stomach dropped instantly. Jeffrey stood beside a black SUV holding a small paper bag from Rosie's diner. Nervous. Actually nervous. Ellie gasped dramatically. It's the diner man! Several parents nearby glanced curiously toward them. Missouri inhaled slowly. Stay calm. The twins looked up at her expectantly, while Jeffrey remained awkwardly frozen across the sidewalk like a man second-guessing every decision simultaneously. Then Ellie waved enthusiastically before Missouri could stop her. Jeffrey lifted one uncertain hand in return, and somehow, seeing him look that nervous around 2 tiny children hurt more than Missouri expected. Missouri walked the twins slowly across the sidewalk, while trying to keep her expression neutral. Inside, her thoughts were anything but neutral. Why is he here? What does he want? Why now? Jeffrey straightened slightly the closer they got, but Missouri still noticed the tension in his posture immediately. He looked like a man walking into a room where he fully expected rejection. Honestly, she couldn't blame him. Ellie reached him first. You came back. Jeffrey blinked once before answering softly. I did. Huey stood quietly beside Missouri, studying him again with careful curiosity. Jeffrey looked toward Missouri briefly. I'm sorry for showing up unexpectedly. Missouri crossed her arms lightly. You still did it. Fair. He accepted that silently. The paper bag in his hand suddenly felt ridiculous now. Like fries could somehow solve 5 years of damage. Ellie pointed immediately. Is that food? Jeffrey looked down at the bag. Yes. For us? Yes. Ellie looked impressed. You really are my kind of person. Despite herself, Missouri nearly smiled. Jeffrey noticed. Tiny. Quick. But he noticed. He carefully held the bag toward the twins. Rosie insisted. Ellie accepted this explanation immediately. That makes sense. Huey remained quieter. Jeffrey crouched slightly until they were closer to eye level. I heard you forgot your drawing last night. Then he carefully pulled the folded sketch from his coat pocket. Huey's eyes widened instantly. You kept it. Jeffrey nodded. It's really good. Huey took the paper carefully before unfolding it again. Missouri watched the interaction silently. There was no performance in Jeffrey's voice, no forced charm, just genuine attention. And somehow that made things harder emotionally instead of easier. Ellie already dug into the fry bag dramatically. These are emotional support fries. Jeffrey laughed softly under his breath. Missouri shook her head. Rosie has corrupted my children. She's a visionary, Ellie corrected. Jeffrey looked toward Missouri again carefully. I know I don't have the right to ask for anything. Missouri stayed quiet. But, Jeffrey continued slowly, I'd like the chance to know them. The honesty in his voice caught her off guard. No arrogance, no entitlement, just regret. Huey looked between them both. Directly in the center of the silence, Missouri's chest tightened immediately. Jeffrey looked down briefly before answering. No. Huey frowned slightly. Why not? Children really did ask the hardest questions with the softest voices. Jeffrey swallowed carefully, because there was no version of the truth that didn't make him sound terrible. Finally he answered honestly. I made a very bad mistake. Ellie paused mid-fry. Missouri stared at him quietly. That answer mattered, because most people rush to protect themselves first. Jeffrey didn't. Huey looked thoughtful. Like when I accidentally broke Mom's coffee mug? Jeffrey almost smiled sadly. Bigger than that. Oh. Silence settled again briefly while cars passed slowly down the street nearby. Then Ellie suddenly asked, Are you rich? Missouri closed her eyes instantly. Ellie, what? Ellie looked confused. Olivia said rich people wear coats like that. Jeffrey actually laughed this time. A real surprised laugh. Missouri fought her own smile again. Barely. Jeffrey looked toward Ellie. I guess technically yes. Ellie nodded thoughtfully. Cool. Then she immediately reached for more fries because apparently wealth ranked below potatoes in importance. Jeffrey looked back toward Missouri again. I know this is unfair. That's one word for it. He accepted that too. A breeze moved softly through the sidewalk while parents and children continued passing nearby. Everything about the moment felt strangely ordinary considering how emotionally complicated it actually was. Jeffrey finally spoke again, quieter this time. I took a DNA test this morning. Missouri's expression changed instantly. Not shocked. Tired. Because of course he did. Jeffrey noticed immediately. I know, he said quickly. I know I shouldn't need one after seeing them. Then why do it? The question carried more hurt than anger. Jeffrey answered honestly. Because I spent 5 years lying to myself. Missouri looked away briefly. That answer hurt because part of her understood it, and another part hated understanding at all. Huey looked up at Jeffrey again. You seem sad a lot. Jeffrey blinked slightly. Children noticed everything. I probably deserve that. Huey considered this carefully, then nodded once like that answer made sense. Ellie suddenly tugged on Missouri's sleeve. Can he come eat dinner with us? Missouri nearly choked. Jeffrey looked equally startled. Ellie, what? She asked innocently. He brought fries. Jeffrey covered part of his mouth briefly, clearly trying not to laugh again. Missouri pointed at her daughter. You cannot invite strangers to dinner. He's not a stranger, Ellie argued confidently. He knows our names. That sentence hit harder than she intended. Jeffrey lowered his eyes briefly afterward. Because she was right in the most painful way possible. He knew their names. He just learned them 5 years too late. The school crossing guard nearby blew a whistle loudly while children scattered toward waiting cars and sidewalks. Missouri finally adjusted the twins' backpacks gently. We should go. Ellie immediately looked disappointed. Aw. Huey clutched his drawing quietly against his chest while studying Jeffrey one last time. Then softly, almost shyly, he asked, Will we see you again? Jeffrey's chest tightened painfully, because he wanted to say yes immediately. But this wasn't his decision alone anymore. So instead, he looked toward Missouri and waited. Missouri noticed. That mattered too, because 5 years ago Jeffrey made decisions without trusting her voice at all. Now he was asking silently for permission before speaking. The difference did not go unnoticed. After several long seconds, Missouri finally answered carefully. Maybe it wasn't forgiveness, but it wasn't rejection either, and somehow that tiny word felt bigger than hope. Jeffrey nodded slowly. Okay. Ellie waved dramatically while walking backward down the sidewalk. Bye, emotional fry man. Jeffrey laughed helplessly. Bye, Ellie. Huey gave one smaller wave too before following Missouri toward the parking lot. Jeffrey remained standing there long after they disappeared, still holding the empty fry bag, still feeling completely overwhelmed. But for the first time in years, the future no longer felt entirely closed to him. Over the next few weeks, Jeffrey became a careful, uncertain presence around the edges of the twins' lives. Never pushy, never demanding, almost cautious, like he understood one wrong move could make Missouri disappear again. And honestly, she still considered it sometimes. But the twins complicated everything, especially Ellie, because Ellie Turner accepted Jeffrey's existence with the emotional confidence of someone welcoming a slightly confused relative back from vacation. One Saturday afternoon, Missouri arrived at the community center gym for Ellie's school recital rehearsal carrying juice boxes and exhaustion. The moment Ellie spotted Jeffrey sitting quietly near the back row of folding chairs, she gasped dramatically. You came! Half the parents turned around immediately. Jeffrey stood awkwardly. I hope that's okay. Ellie sprinted toward him before Missouri could answer. It's okay because I decided it's okay. Missouri rubbed her forehead tiredly. That's not how permission works. It should be... Jeffrey tried unsuccessfully not to smile. He discovered quickly that resisting Ellie's personality was almost impossible. The little girl operated with complete emotional certainty at all times. Meanwhile, Huey approached more slowly beside Missouri, while carrying a small notebook beneath one arm. Jeffrey noticed immediately. Working on something? Huey nodded shyly before holding out the notebook. Inside were pencil sketches of buildings around Briarwood again. Jeffrey stared at the pages carefully. The details had improved. Perspective lines, window structure, tiny rooftop designs. For 5 years, Jeffrey imagined what his children might look like sometimes. He never imagined one of them would unknowingly inherit pieces of him this clearly. "These are really impressive," he said honestly. Huey smiled slightly at the compliment. That tiny smile hit Jeffrey harder every single time, because it felt earned. Missouri watched quietly from nearby while Ellie grabbed Jeffrey's hand and started dragging him toward the stage area. "Come see my dance." Jeffrey looked mildly alarmed. "Right now?" "Yes. I feel unqualified. You just clap when everyone else claps." "That sounds manageable." Missouri almost laughed. Almost. Watching him around the twins felt emotionally dangerous, because this version of Jeffrey looked nothing like the cold man who accused her years ago. This Jeffrey listened carefully, paid attention, showed up, and part of her hated that the twins clearly liked him already. The recital rehearsal itself was chaotic in the way all children's performances are chaotic. Music stopping randomly, kids forgetting directions, parents pretending everything looked organized. Jeffrey sat quietly beside Missouri in the back row while Ellie danced aggressively offbeat near the stage. "She's very committed," Jeffrey whispered carefully. "She has no rhythm, none, but somehow still confidence." Jeffrey smiled softly. "I respect that." For a moment the conversation felt painfully familiar. Easy, like old versions of themselves briefly returned without permission. Then Missouri caught herself relaxing beside him, and immediately straightened slightly again. Jeffrey noticed. Of course he noticed. That hurt too, because every small moment of comfort between them still carried years of damage underneath. Halfway through rehearsal, Huey quietly slid into the seat beside Jeffrey holding another drawing page. "This one's your building?" Jeffrey frowned slightly before looking down. The sketch showed Shone Tower downtown, one of his company's oldest buildings. "You know this place?" Huey nodded. "We drive past it after school." Jeffrey stared at the drawing silently for a second, then softly asked, "You like buildings a lot, huh?" Huey shrugged. "They make sense." The answer landed directly in Jeffrey's chest, because that sounded exactly like something he would have said at 5 years old too. Missouri noticed it immediately as well, and suddenly she remembered another night years ago when Jeffrey once admitted quietly, "Buildings are easier than people. At least they follow the plans you give them." Back then she thought it sounded sad. Now hearing echoes of him in Huey's voice felt even sadder somehow. After rehearsal ended, children scattered everywhere while parents gathered bags and jackets. Ellie immediately ran back toward Jeffrey proudly. "Did you see my spin?" "I did. I almost fell. You recovered emotionally." Ellie nodded seriously. "That's important." Jeffrey laughed quietly. Then Ellie reached for his hand naturally while talking about snack options with complete confidence. The gesture was small, innocent, but Missouri saw Jeffrey freeze slightly anyway, like he still wasn't fully used to being touched by his own child. That realization hurt more than she expected. Later, while Ellie debated cookies near the vending machines, Huey stood beside Jeffrey near the hallway windows. "You smile more now," Huey said suddenly. Jeffrey blinked slightly. "What?" Huey looked thoughtful. "The first day at the diner. You looked sad." Jeffrey's throat tightened instantly. Children noticed everything. "And now?" he asked carefully. Huey shrugged lightly. "Less sad." Jeffrey looked down briefly toward the floor, because somehow hearing that from a 5-year-old nearly destroyed him emotionally. Missouri watched from several feet away while holding Ellie's jacket, and for the first time since Jeffrey returned, she saw something she hadn't expected. Not guilt, not regret. Love. Real love growing quietly between him and the twins. The frightening part? The twins felt it too, especially Huey, because beneath all his quietness, Huey had already started watching Jeffrey the way little boys watch men they want to understand. That attachment terrified Missouri more than she wanted to admit, because if Jeffrey disappeared again, it wouldn't just break her this time, it would break them too. A few days later, Missouri came home from a double shift to find Jeffrey sitting cross-legged on her apartment floor helping Huey build a cardboard skyline. For a moment, she simply stood in the doorway silently holding her purse. The scene caught her completely off guard. Tiny paper buildings covered the coffee table. Tape rolls littered the carpet. Ellie sat upside down across the couch eating crackers dramatically while offering completely unnecessary advice. "That building looks emotionally unstable," she announced. Huey frowned at her. "It's modern. That's what people say before things collapse." Jeffrey covered his mouth briefly, clearly trying not to laugh. Then he noticed Missouri standing there. Immediately he stood. "You're home." The word sounded strangely natural coming from him, like this already felt normal. That realization hit Missouri harder than expected. Ellie spotted her instantly. "Mom, We made a city, I can see that. Huey carefully lifted one cardboard tower proudly. This one's downtown. Missouri walked farther inside slowly while taking off her coat. She looked tired enough that even Ellie noticed immediately. You have exhausted eyebrows. Missouri blinked. I hate that all of you describe emotions through eyebrows now. Jeffrey smiled faintly. Seems accurate, though. Missouri shot him a look. Traitor. Jeffrey stepped closer carefully. Long day? Missouri exhaled heavily. One kid swallowed part of a chess piece. Ellie gasped. Which piece? The horse. That's not a horse. It's a knight. Missouri stared at her daughter. How are you correcting the medical emergency? Accuracy matters. Jeffrey laughed quietly again, and before Missouri could stop herself, she laughed too. Small, tired, real. The sound affected Jeffrey immediately, because hearing her laugh around him again still felt like something fragile he hadn't earned back fully. Huey held up another building. Can you help me with this roof? Jeffrey looked toward Missouri first automatically, asking permission silently. That still mattered. Missouri noticed it every single time. She gave one small nod. Jeffrey crouched beside Huey again while carefully adjusting the cardboard pieces. There, he said softly. Try holding this side. Huey concentrated seriously while taping the structure together. Missouri watched them from the kitchen entrance while loosening her hospital badge slowly. The similarity between them remained impossible to ignore. Same expressions, same focus, same thoughtful quietness. It hurt and healed her simultaneously. Ellie suddenly appeared beside Missouri holding crackers. You're staring. I'm tired. You get quiet when you're emotional. Missouri narrowed her eyes. Who keeps teaching you these things? I observe people. That's honestly terrifying. Ellie nodded proudly before whispering loudly. I think he really likes us. Missouri's chest tightened unexpectedly, because that was the problem. He did, and the twins already liked him too, a dangerous amount. Later that evening, Jeffrey stayed for dinner after Ellie invited him with complete authority before Missouri could object. Again. You make invitations like you pay rent here, Missouri told her. I bring personality, Ellie replied confidently. Jeffrey nearly laughed into his water. Dinner itself felt strangely normal, too normal. The twins argued over garlic bread. Huey explained skyscraper designs. Ellie told dramatic stories about school politics. At one point, she pointed toward Jeffrey accusingly. You cut sandwiches wrong. Jeffrey blinked. There are wrong ways? Yes. Missouri shook her head. Welcome to living with tiny dictators. Jeffrey smiled while Ellie continued her passionate speech about sandwich geometry. And suddenly, he felt something dangerous again. Home. Not the penthouse, not the expensive properties, not the carefully designed life he spent years building. This, the noise, the laughter, the cluttered apartment, the cardboard skyline still sitting half-finished near the couch. He wanted this. The realization frightened him deeply, because wanting things meant risking losing them, again. After dinner, Huey pulled Jeffrey toward the coffee table excitedly. Come see the lights. Jeffrey frowned slightly. The lights? Huey proudly switched off the living room lamp. Tiny battery-powered tea lights suddenly glowed inside the cardboard buildings across the floor. Jeffrey stared quietly. The little city looked warm and alive beneath the soft lights. Ellie spread both arms dramatically. Welcome to Cardboard Birmingham. Missouri laughed softly from the kitchen while washing dishes. Jeffrey looked toward her automatically, and for one dangerous second, it almost felt like they were a family already. The thought hit both of them at the same time. Missouri looked away first. Jeffrey noticed instantly. The silence afterward shifted slightly, more fragile now. The twins eventually disappeared down the hallway to brush their teeth while Missouri finished rinsing dishes quietly at the sink. Jeffrey stepped closer carefully. You don't have to clean right now. If I stop moving, I'll fall asleep standing. That sounds unhealthy. It's called motherhood. Jeffrey leaned lightly against the counter beside her. For a few seconds, neither spoke. Then softly he said, Thank you. Missouri kept drying dishes. For what? For letting me be here. The honesty in his voice made her pause briefly. Jeffrey looked down toward his hands. I know I don't deserve how patient you've been. Missouri exhaled quietly. That depends on the day. Fair. He accepted that too. The apartment remained softly quiet around them while the twins argued loudly somewhere down the hallway about toothpaste. Then Jeffrey spoke again. I think about that night constantly. Missouri's hand slowed against the dish towel. You don't have to. Yes, he said quietly. I do. Silence. Painful silence. because both of them remembered everything too clearly. Jeffrey swallowed carefully before continuing. I said unforgivable things to you. Missouri finally looked at him fully. And you believed them when you said them. That truth landed hard. Jeffrey lowered his eyes briefly. At the time, yes. Missouri nodded slowly. That's the part people don't understand. Her voice remained calm. No one accidentally destroys trust. They choose to... Jeffrey felt the words settle heavily into his chest. Because she was right again. Missouri folded the kitchen towel carefully before speaking softer this time. You didn't just leave me alone, Jeffrey. Her eyes glistened faintly now. You made me feel ashamed for loving you. Jeffrey looked completely wrecked hearing that out loud. And for the first time since reconnecting, Missouri saw tears gather faintly in his eyes before he looked away quickly. Not dramatic tears, the kind people try hard to hide. That almost hurt worse. Jeffrey stood quietly beside the kitchen counter while the sound of the twins arguing drifted faintly from down the hallway. For several seconds, neither he nor Missouri spoke. The silence between them felt heavier now, more honest. Jeffrey rubbed one hand slowly across his jaw before finally saying, There's not a single excuse good enough for what I did. Missouri looked down at the dish towel in her hands. No, she answered softly. There isn't. Jeffrey nodded once, accepting it, not fighting it. That mattered more than she wanted it to. Most people rush to defend themselves when confronted with pain they caused. Jeffrey didn't. He simply stood there carrying the weight of it openly. I was afraid, he admitted quietly. Missouri laughed once under her breath. Not cruelly, just tired. You keep saying that like fear made the decision for you. Jeffrey looked at her carefully. Maybe I wanted it to. That answer surprised her, because it was honest in an ugly way. Jeffrey leaned back lightly against the counter. My father trusted the wrong people until it destroyed him, he continued quietly. Then Vanessa happened and... He shook his head once. After a while, you stopped seeing people clearly. Missouri crossed her arms gently. No, you stopped giving them the benefit of the doubt. Jeffrey lowered his eyes briefly again. Another truth. Another deserved one. Missouri sighed softly before looking toward the hallway, where the twins' voices still floated faintly through the apartment. They love quickly, she said quietly. Jeffrey's chest tightened immediately because he understood exactly what she meant. And I'm scared of what happens if you disappear again. The words landed directly where they needed to. Jeffrey answered instantly this time. I'm not going anywhere. Missouri looked at him for a long moment. That's easy to promise now. Jeffrey swallowed carefully. Because she was right again. Promises were easy. Consistency wasn't. Before either could continue, Ellie suddenly burst back into the kitchen, dramatically holding a toothbrush. Huey says penguins don't have knees. Jeffrey blinked. That's the emergency? It matters. Huey appeared behind her, looking deeply offended. They look kneeless. They have knees, Ellie argued confidently. Missouri closed her eyes briefly. I'm begging both of you to brush your teeth. Jeffrey covered part of his mouth, trying not to laugh. Ellie pointed accusingly at him. You agree with me. Jeffrey immediately betrayed Huey. Penguins definitely have knees, Huey gasped dramatically. Wow. Missouri laughed softly despite herself while Huey walked away emotionally wounded. Betrayal everywhere, he muttered. The shift in atmosphere happened naturally after that, lighter again, but underneath it all, the earlier conversation remained sitting quietly between the adults. Later that night, after the twins finally fell asleep, Jeffrey prepared to leave. Missouri walked him toward the apartment door while tired silence settled around them both. Jeffrey slipped on his coat slowly, then hesitated. Can I ask you something? Missouri leaned lightly against the doorway. That depends. Do you hate me? The question caught her off guard. Not because she hadn't asked herself that before, because she didn't fully know the answer anymore. Missouri looked down briefly before answering honestly. I hated what you did to me. Jeffrey stayed quiet. But hating you, she shook her head softly. That would have been easier. Jeffrey's chest tightened painfully. Because somehow that sounded worse. Missouri looked up at him carefully. You broke something in me back then. No anger, no yelling, just truth. Jeffrey looked like he physically felt the weight of those words settle onto him. Then quietly he asked, Do you think it can heal? Missouri didn't answer immediately, because she genuinely didn't know. Part of her still remembered. Milkshake dates, candlelight during storms, feeling safe beside him. And another part remembered standing alone in a bathroom holding ultrasound photos while the man she loved questioned her character. Both versions existed at once. Finally she answered softly, I think some things heal differently after they break. Jeffrey nodded slowly. again accepting the truth instead of arguing against it. He moved toward the hallway door after that, then paused once more before leaving. "Huey has your patience," he said quietly. Missouri blinked slightly. "And Ellie has your ability to create chaos." A small smile finally tugged at her mouth. Jeffrey noticed immediately. And God, he missed that smile. "Good night, Missouri." "Good night, Jeffrey." This time when he left, Missouri stood at the doorway longer than usual after it closed behind him. Not because she was falling back in love. At least that's what she told herself. But because for the first time in 5 years, Jeffrey no longer felt like a ghost from her past. Now he felt real again, and that was far more dangerous. Downstairs, Jeffrey stepped outside into the cool briarwood night, while emotions twisted heavily inside his chest. The apartment lights still glowed softly from Missouri's window above. Home. That word returned again, painfully, because he finally understood what he lost. Not just Missouri, everything. The family dinners, the bedtime arguments, the tiny ordinary moments. 5 years of love he never got to touch because fear convinced him to destroy it before it could become real. Jeffrey stood beside his car for a long moment, staring up toward the apartment window. Then quietly, almost like a promise to himself, he whispered, "I'm going to earn this back, even if it took the rest of his life." The DNA results arrived 3 days later. Jeffrey stared at the unopened envelope for nearly 20 minutes before touching it. It sat on the kitchen counter beside untouched coffee, while morning sunlight stretched across the penthouse windows behind him. Simple white paper, thin, yet somehow heavy enough to make his chest feel tight, because deep down, he already knew. Not from the twins' faces, not from Huey's sketches, not even from Ellie's expressions. He knew because every moment around them felt painfully familiar. Still, opening the envelope meant facing the truth fully. No denial left afterward. No emotional hiding place. Jeffrey finally picked it up slowly, then opened it. His eyes scanned the page once. Positive probability of paternity, 99.99%. Silence filled the apartment. Jeffrey lowered himself slowly into the nearest chair while emotion climbed hard into his throat. His children. The words settled differently now. More real. More devastating. Because suddenly the years felt measurable. 5 birthdays missed. 5 Christmas mornings. 5 years of hearing Dad belonged to nobody. Jeffrey covered his mouth briefly while staring at the paper again. And strangely, the result changed almost nothing emotionally, because somewhere between, Ellie stealing fries off his plate, Huey proudly showing him cardboard skylines, and hearing tiny footsteps race through Missouri's apartment, his heart already knew. The real problem had never been biology. The real problem was whether he deserved them now. That evening, Jeffrey drove toward Missouri's apartment, carrying the envelope inside his coat pocket. The entire drive, his stomach remained tight. Not because he feared the result, because he feared what came after. Missouri opened the apartment door wearing loose sweatpants and one of the twins' blankets wrapped around her shoulders. "You look tired," Jeffrey said softly. "I live with children." "Fair." Before he could continue, Ellie suddenly appeared beside Missouri holding a marker-covered stuffed rabbit. "Mom accidentally burned grilled cheese." Missouri looked offended. It was lightly overcooked. It tasted like smoke. Jeffrey smiled despite himself. "I survived." "You weren't the victim," Ellie informed him seriously. Huey appeared quietly behind them carrying another drawing notebook. "Hi." Jeffrey's expression softened immediately. "Hey, buddy." That word slipped out naturally. "Buddy." Huey didn't seem to mind. Missouri stepped aside reluctantly. "Come in." The apartment smelled faintly like tomato soup and burned bread. Somewhere in the background, cartoons played quietly from the living room television. Normal life. Jeffrey found himself loving these tiny imperfect details more every time he visited. Ellie immediately climbed back onto the couch dramatically. "We watched a documentary about sharks." "It was not a documentary," Huey corrected. "It was cartoons. There were shark facts. That doesn't make it science." Jeffrey laughed softly while Missouri moved toward the kitchen. "Do you want coffee?" "Only if it's not burnt, too." Missouri pointed a spoon at him. "Leave if you're going to be disrespectful." The twins giggled instantly, and for one dangerous second, the apartment felt warm in a way Jeffrey still wasn't emotionally prepared for. Later, after the twins disappeared into the hallway to finish homework, the atmosphere shifted quietly again. Missouri noticed immediately. Jeffrey reached slowly into his coat pocket before placing the folded paper onto the kitchen counter between them. Missouri looked down at it silently. "The results?" she asked quietly. Jeffrey nodded once. She didn't touch the paper, didn't rush toward it. Because unlike Jeffrey, she never needed proof. "I already know what it says," she answered softly. Jeffrey lowered his eyes briefly. I know. Silence settled heavily around them. Then finally Missouri picked up the paper anyway and glanced over it quickly. Her expression never changed. Not satisfaction, not victory, only sadness, because this should have never required confirmation in the first place. Jeffrey noticed that too. That test wasn't really about them, Missouri said quietly. He looked up. It was about you convincing yourself to stop running from the truth. The accuracy of that statement left him speechless. Missouri folded the paper carefully again before setting it back down, then softly asked, So, what happens now? Jeffrey answered honestly. I don't know. That truth frightened him. But strangely, it also felt cleaner now than pretending certainty. Missouri leaned lightly against the kitchen counter while studying him carefully. You know what the hardest part was? Jeffrey's chest tightened immediately. What? Not raising them alone. Her voice remained calm. It was looking at them every day and wondering how someone who loved me once could believe I was capable of something so ugly. Jeffrey closed his eyes briefly, because there was no defense against that, only guilt. I was wrong, he said quietly. No, Missouri answered softly. You were afraid. Jeffrey looked at her. And fear made you cruel. That landed harder because it was true. No screaming, no dramatic confrontation, just honest damage finally spoken out loud. Jeffrey rested both hands lightly against the edge of the counter before admitting, I've hated myself for years over this. Missouri's expression softened slightly. Not enough for forgiveness, but enough to show she believed him. You should, she whispered. The honesty hurt. But somehow, he appreciated it, because Missouri had never been cruel even when she had every right to be. Then quietly, after a long silence, Jeffrey finally admitted the thing sitting deepest inside him. I don't expect you to forgive me, Missouri looked down briefly, but I want to spend the rest of my life making sure those kids never doubt how much I love them. Emotion tightened visibly in his throat now. And if that's all I ever get, he swallowed carefully, I'll still be grateful for it. Missouri stared at him silently afterward, because that answer sounded different than apologies usually sounded. No manipulation, no pressure, no demands, just accountability. And maybe that's why it affected her more than she wanted. From down the hallway, Ellie suddenly yelled, Huey touched my markers with betrayal hands. Jeffrey blinked. Missouri sighed heavily. See? She muttered tiredly. Chaos. Jeffrey laughed softly under his breath, and for the first time in years, the sound no longer felt painful inside this apartment. Over the next 2 months, healing arrived quietly, not dramatically, not perfectly, through repetition. Jeffrey showed up consistently, again, and again, and again. School pickups, homework help, weekend breakfasts, dance rehearsals, no disappearing, no broken promises. At first, Missouri kept waiting for the effort to fade. She expected missed calls eventually, excuses, distance. Instead, Jeffrey kept showing up. That consistency slowly became impossible to ignore. One Saturday morning, Missouri walked into the kitchen half awake and stopped immediately. Jeffrey stood near the stove flipping pancakes while Huey carefully arranged blueberries into building shapes on plates nearby. Ellie sat on the counter dramatically supervising everyone. You're making them too round, she informed Jeffrey seriously. They're pancakes, he answered. They should have personality. Jeffrey looked toward Huey. Can pancakes have personality? Huey nodded thoughtfully. Yes, Jeffrey sighed. I'm losing this argument, aren't I? Badly, Ellie confirmed. Missouri leaned against the doorway, quietly watching them. For one strange moment, everything felt normal, dangerously normal. Jeffrey looked up first. His entire expression softened immediately when he saw her standing there. Morning, Missouri crossed her arms lightly. You cook now? I'm adaptable, Ellie pointed dramatically toward the stove. He burned the first batch. Traitor, Jeffrey muttered. I believe in truth. Missouri laughed softly before she could stop herself, and Jeffrey looked at her for half a second too long afterward, because hearing her laugh freely around him still felt like something precious. The twins noticed everything, especially Ellie. Later that afternoon, while Missouri folded laundry in her bedroom, Ellie suddenly appeared beside her, holding 2 socks in deep emotional concern. You like him again? Missouri nearly dropped a towel. What? Ellie shrugged casually. You smile differently now. Missouri stared at her daughter in disbelief. Why are you analyzing people at 6 years old? I'm advanced. That's terrifying. Ellie climbed onto the bed beside her. He looks happier too. Missouri folded another shirt carefully just to keep her hands busy. Adults say that when they don't want to answer questions, Missouri almost laughed. Because unfortunately, that was completely true. Meanwhile, across the apartment, Jeffrey helped Huey finish a cardboard rooftop project near the living room floor. Huey adjusted tiny paper windows carefully. Do you build real buildings every day? Jeffrey nodded. Most days. Huey looked impressed. That's cool. Jeffrey smiled faintly. It's mostly meetings. That's less cool. Very less cool. Huey laughed softly. Then after a moment he asked quietly, Why were you gone before? The question hit without warning. Jeffrey's hands paused against the cardboard pieces instantly. Across the room, cartoons continued playing softly while sunlight stretched through the apartment windows. But inside Jeffrey's chest, everything tightened. Children asked hard questions so gently. He looked toward Huey carefully. I got scared, he admitted honestly. Huey frowned slightly. Of us? Jeffrey's throat tightened painfully. No, he answered immediately. Never of you. Huey stayed quiet, waiting for more. Jeffrey lowered his eyes briefly before continuing. Sometimes adults let fear convince them to make very bad decisions. Huey considered that answer thoughtfully, then softly asked, Like regret? Jeffrey blinked slightly. Missouri's word. He nodded slowly. Yeah, he whispered. Exactly like regret. Huey looked down at the cardboard skyline for a moment, then finally said, I'm glad you came back. The simple honesty nearly destroyed Jeffrey emotionally. Because children forgave so much easier than adults, and somehow that made the guilt even heavier. That evening after the twins fell asleep, Missouri found Jeffrey standing alone on the apartment balcony, staring out over downtown Briarwood. City lights glowed softly below, while warm summer air moved quietly through the night. Missouri stepped beside him carefully. You're thinking too hard again. Jeffrey smiled faintly without looking away. Still doing that, huh? You make it easy. Silence settled comfortably between them. Not awkward anymore. Familiar. Jeffrey rested both hands lightly against the balcony railing. Huey asked why I left. Missouri looked toward him immediately. Jeffrey laughed quietly under his breath. I've negotiated million-dollar projects with less fear than that conversation. Missouri's expression softened slightly. What did you tell him? The truth. She studied him carefully. And? Jeffrey looked down briefly. He said he was glad I came back. Emotion tightened visibly in his voice near the end. Missouri noticed instantly. For a few seconds, neither spoke. Then softly she said, They love you. Jeffrey closed his eyes briefly at the words, because hearing them out loud felt overwhelming. I don't know what I did to deserve that, Missouri answered honestly. Right now? Not much. Jeffrey nodded slowly. Fair again. Then Missouri looked out across the glowing city lights before quietly adding, But you're trying. The words were small, simple, yet somehow they felt bigger than forgiveness. Jeffrey looked toward her carefully, and for the first time in years, hope returned carefully into his chest. Not loud, not certain, but real. A week later, Rosie decided the family needed fresh air and carbohydrates, which somehow turned into all four of them eating dinner on the rooftop patio above the diner after closing hours. String lights glowed overhead while warm Alabama air drifted softly through the night. Below them, Briarwood moved lazily beneath glowing streetlights and distant music from downtown bars. Ellie sat sideways in her chair, stealing fries from everybody's plate with complete confidence. Huey leaned over his sketchpad near Jeffrey, drawing the city skyline again. And Missouri caught herself smiling too often. That realization made her nervous. Rosie appeared from the stairwell carrying another basket of fries dramatically. I'm feeding y'all until somebody admits they're in love. Missouri nearly inhaled lemonade wrong. Rosie. What? Rosie looked offended. I'm old, not blind. Jeffrey lowered his head, laughing quietly, while Ellie pointed immediately. I think they already know. Missouri stared at her daughter. You are 6, and observant. Huey didn't even look up from his sketchpad. She's definitely observant. Rosie placed the fries onto the table proudly. Exactly. Tiny detectives. Then she disappeared downstairs again before Missouri could recover emotionally. Jeffrey smiled into his drink. You handle embarrassment aggressively. I'm being attacked by senior citizens and children. That's fair. Ellie reached toward his plate again. Also, your fries are better. They're literally the same fries. No. Yours have confidence. Jeffrey blinked slowly. That sentence meant nothing. It meant everything, Ellie replied seriously. Missouri laughed softly into her hands. And suddenly Jeffrey realized something important. This sound, this exact moment, this was what happiness actually felt like. Not business victories, not awards, not expensive penthouses. This, messy conversations, warm night air, children arguing about emotional fries, home. Huey suddenly nudged Jeffrey's arm gently. Look. Jeffrey looked down at the sketch pad. Huey had drawn the rooftop exactly as it looked now. The string lights, the tables, the city skyline, and sitting together near the center, their family. Jeffrey stared at the drawing silently. His throat tightened immediately. You drew all of us. Huey nodded shyly. Missouri looked over too, and suddenly emotion hit her harder than expected. Because Huey hadn't drawn Jeffrey separately anymore. He placed him beside them naturally, like he belonged there. Jeffrey swallowed carefully before looking at Huey again. This is amazing. Huey smiled softly while returning to the sketch. Ellie leaned dramatically across the table. He keeps drawing you taller than everybody. I am taller than everybody, Jeffrey answered, emotionally or physically. Jeffrey laughed helplessly. Where do you learn these questions? The internet, Ellie replied proudly. Missouri groaned immediately. That explains everything. For several minutes afterward, conversation drifted easily again. Small things, ordinary things. Missouri talking about hospital chaos, Huey explaining rooftop architecture, Ellie creating dramatic stories about school lunch politics. Jeffrey sat quietly absorbing every second. Because for years he convinced himself success meant building bigger things. Now he understood the most important thing he ever built was sitting at this table beside him. And he almost destroyed it before it began. A soft breeze moved across the rooftop while distant thunder rumbled far away beyond Briarwood. Ellie suddenly reached for another fry too aggressively. Her elbow bumped the small fruit bowl near the center of the table. 2 oranges rolled free instantly. One spun across the rooftop floor. The other stopped near Jeffrey's shoe. Silence. Small, unexpected, emotional silence. Missouri looked at the oranges first, then at Jeffrey, and immediately both of them remembered. The parking lot, the rain, the first conversation, the beginning of everything. Jeffrey slowly bent down and picked up the orange near his foot. A quiet laugh escaped him. Looks familiar. Missouri smiled before she could stop herself. A real smile this time. Not guarded, not cautious, warm. Jeffrey looked at her carefully after that. Really looked at her. The woman who worked impossible hospital shifts, raised twins alone, survived heartbreak without becoming bitter. The woman he almost lost forever because he let fear become cruelty. His voice softened completely. The best thing that ever happened to me. He glanced down briefly at the orange in his hand before looking back at her. Started with falling oranges. The words settled gently into the warm Alabama night. Missouri's eyes glistened faintly. Not from sadness this time. Something softer. Healing, maybe. Ellie looked between them dramatically. Oh, wow. That was very romantic. Huey nodded thoughtfully. Extremely. Jeffrey covered his eyes, briefly laughing. Missouri shook her head, smiling, while Ellie leaned across the table again. So are y'all kissing now, or? Ellie, both adults said at once. The twins burst into laughter immediately afterward, and for the first time in years, Missouri laughed with them freely. No fear attached, no heartbreak waiting underneath, just warmth, just family. Above them, the rooftop lights glowed softly against the dark Alabama sky, while laughter drifted gently through the warm night air. And this time, neither of them looked away. For the first time in years, Jeffrey stopped fearing quiet moments. Before Missouri and the twins returned to his life, silence inside his penthouse used to feel endless. Now silence looked different. Now it sounded like Ellie arguing with cartoons from the living room, Huey sketching beside the window, Missouri humming absent-mindedly while folding laundry, pancakes burning slightly because somebody got distracted laughing. Life had become messy, human, and Jeffrey loved it more than he knew how to explain. A few nights after the rooftop dinner, the twins insisted on a family movie night, which Ellie treated with the seriousness of a government operation. No sad movies, she announced while arranging blankets across the couch. Last time Mom cried over animated dogs, that dog died. Missouri defended emotionally from the kitchen. It was still excessive. Huey sat cross-legged near the coffee table, organizing snacks carefully by category. Jeffrey walked in carrying popcorn bowls while watching the chaos unfold around him. And suddenly it hit him again. This was a life he almost lost forever. Ellie pointed dramatically toward the couch. You sit there. Jeffrey blinked. specific. It matters for blanket balance, obviously. Missouri walked in holding drinks before stopping briefly at the sight of Jeffrey already helping the twins settle in naturally. No awkwardness anymore, no uncertainty, just belonging. That realization still scared her sometimes, because it felt real now. Jeffrey looked up toward her. "You okay?" Missouri nodded softly before handing him a drink. Yeah, but the truth was more complicated, because somewhere along the way she stopped waiting for disappointment every time Jeffrey showed up, and that terrified her. Movie night lasted almost 2 hours. Ellie talked through at least half of it. Huey corrected plot holes seriously. Jeffrey somehow ended up with popcorn spilled across his lap after Ellie laughed too aggressively during one scene.
"This house is dangerous," he muttered.
"Emotionally or physically?" Ellie asked immediately. Jeffrey looked toward Missouri. "She's impossible. She gets it from me. That explains everything." Missouri smiled into her drink quietly, and for a second, Jeffrey forgot to breathe again, because there it was, that smile, the real one. Not careful anymore, not guarded, warm. Later that night, after the twins finally fell asleep tangled together beneath blankets on the couch, Jeffrey helped Missouri clean up quietly in the kitchen. The apartment felt peaceful now, safe. Jeffrey rinsed dishes while Missouri dried them beside him. "You know," she said softly, "you're weirdly good at this." Jeffrey glanced sideways at her. "At dishes? At being here?" The words landed gently, but deeply. Jeffrey shut off the sink slowly before answering. "I think this is the only place I've ever actually wanted to be." Missouri looked down briefly at the towel in her hands, because part of her understood exactly what he meant. The apartment wasn't glamorous, wasn't perfect, but it was alive, and somehow Jeffrey fit into it naturally now in ways neither of them expected. Missouri finally spoke again. "The twins trust you completely." Emotion flickered across Jeffrey's face instantly. "I don't take that lightly, I know." Silence settled softly between them. Not painful this time, comfortable. Then Jeffrey leaned lightly against the counter before asking quietly, "What about you?" Missouri looked up slowly. "What about me? Do you trust me yet?" The question stayed suspended between them for several seconds, because trust wasn't simple anymore. Not after 5 years, not after heartbreak, not after rebuilding everything alone. But Missouri also couldn't ignore reality anymore either. Jeffrey stayed, Jeffrey listened, Jeffrey tried, consistently. Finally, she answered honestly, "I think." She paused carefully. "I'm starting to trust who you are now." Jeffrey's chest tightened immediately, not because the answer was perfect, because it was earned. And somehow that meant more. Missouri stepped closer unconsciously while placing the towel onto the counter beside him. "You changed." Jeffrey shook his head softly. "No." Missouri frowned slightly. "I think losing you changed me." The honesty in his voice completely disarmed her. Jeffrey looked down briefly before continuing quietly. "I spent years building everything except the life I actually wanted." Missouri's throat tightened, because she could hear how true that was. Jeffrey looked back up at her slowly. "And then I saw Huey holding that sketchpad in the diner." He swallowed carefully. "And I realized fear cost me 5 years with my children." Emotion climbed visibly into his voice now. "And almost cost me you forever." Missouri stared at him silently. No rehearsed speech, no dramatic performance, just truth. The kind that arrives after someone finally stops hiding from themselves. Then softly, almost uncertainly, Jeffrey admitted, "I still love you." The apartment went completely still. Even the refrigerator hum suddenly sounded louder. Missouri's heartbeat stumbled painfully inside her chest, because part of her knew this moment was coming eventually. Still, hearing the words out loud felt overwhelming. Jeffrey immediately looked nervous afterward. Not confident, not expecting anything, just honest. Missouri looked away briefly while emotion tangled heavily inside her. 5 years ago she would have answered instantly. Now healing made everything slower, more careful. Finally she whispered softly, "You hurt me so badly." Jeffrey's eyes lowered immediately. "I know, and part of me still remembers every second of it. I know that too." Missouri looked back at him carefully. "But," she exhaled slowly, "part of me remembers loving you too." Hope flickered visibly across Jeffrey's face before he tried controlling it again. Missouri noticed anyway. Then after several long seconds, she stepped closer. Not all the way, but enough. Jeffrey's breathing slowed unevenly. "You don't get to rush this," Missouri whispered. "I won't. You don't get to break us again." Jeffrey answered instantly, "I'd rather lose everything else first." That answer hit her harder than expected, and before fear could interrupt again, Missouri reached for his hand. Small gesture, simple. But Jeffrey looked down at their hands together like it meant everything in the world, because honestly, it did. Outside, warm Alabama rain began falling softly again against the apartment windows. And inside the little apartment filled with cardboard skylines, burnt pancakes, and healing hearts, love quietly found its way home. Months later, Briarwood hardly reacted to seeing Jeffrey shown with the Turner family anymore. At first, people whispered, the billionaire developer, the nurse, the twins who looked exactly like him. Small towns survived on curiosity, but eventually the story stopped feeling scandalous and started feeling normal, which was exactly what Jeffrey wanted. Normal. Saturday grocery runs with Huey, helping Ellie with school projects that somehow involved glitter explosions, late-night pharmacy trips when somebody caught the flu. Ordinary life became his favorite thing in the world. One Sunday afternoon, the four of them wandered slowly through Harper's Market together, the same grocery store parking lot where everything first began years earlier. Huey pushed the shopping cart carefully, while Jeffrey pretended not to notice Ellie sneaking cookies into it. "I saw that," he said calmly. Ellie gasped dramatically. "You have eyes everywhere. I'm highly trained." Missouri laughed softly while reaching for pasta sauce nearby. "You're both exhausting." Jeffrey smiled toward her automatically. And after all these months, that look between them no longer carried uncertainty, only warmth. Healing hadn't happened overnight. There were still difficult conversations sometimes, still moments where old pain resurfaced unexpectedly. But now they faced those moments together instead of separately. That changed everything. Ellie tossed another snack into the cart proudly. "Movie night requires preparation. You already bought 3 boxes of candy. That's beginner candy." Jeffrey looked toward Huey. "Do you also support this criminal activity?" Huey considered carefully. "She makes compelling arguments." "Traitor," Missouri muttered. They continued through the store laughing quietly together while other shoppers passed nearby. Completely ordinary, exactly the kind of life Jeffrey once thought he didn't have time for. Near the produce section, Missouri reached for a bag of oranges, then paused. Jeffrey noticed immediately. Their eyes met, and both smiled at the exact same moment. Ellie looked between them suspiciously. "Okay, what was that look?" "Nothing," both adults answered instantly. Ellie narrowed her eyes dramatically. "Interesting." Huey kept pushing the cart calmly. "They're doing emotional eye contact again." Missouri nearly choked laughing. "You two spend too much time around Rosie." "That woman changed us," Ellie replied seriously. Jeffrey laughed quietly under his breath while Missouri dropped the oranges carefully into the cart. The same fruit that started everything. Funny how life worked sometimes. As they moved toward checkout, Huey tugged lightly on Jeffrey's sleeve. "Can I show you something later?" "Of course. It's a surprise." Jeffrey smiled softly. "Now I'm nervous." "You should be," Ellie informed him. To his bedroom immediately after dinner while everyone else cleaned up. A few minutes later, he returned carrying a large sketchbook against his chest. Jeffrey noticed the nervous excitement on his face instantly. "What's this?" Huey climbed carefully onto the couch beside him before opening the sketchbook slowly. Inside were dozens of drawings, buildings, rooftops, downtown streets, but near the center of the book, a different drawing appeared, their family, not cartoonish this time, detailed. Missouri laughing in the kitchen, Ellie talking dramatically from the couch, Jeffrey helping Huey with one of his cardboard cities. Home. Jeffrey stared silently at the page for several seconds. Emotion climbed hard into his throat almost immediately. "You drew us," Huey nodded shyly. "It's my favorite place." That sentence nearly destroyed Missouri emotionally from across the room. Jeffrey swallowed carefully before asking, "Our apartment?" Huey shook his head softly. "No." Then he pointed toward all of them together in the drawing. "Here." Silence filled the room instantly. Not awkward silence. The kind that happens when love becomes too big for words briefly. Missouri looked away quickly, wiping beneath one eye before tears could fully fall. Ellie noticed immediately. "Mom's crying." "I'm not crying. You absolutely are." Jeffrey smiled helplessly before pulling Huey gently against his side. And for the first time in his life, he understood something important. Success had never been about buildings. It was this, being trusted, being loved, being present, the things money could never buy back once lost. Later that night, after the twins fell asleep, Missouri stood quietly beside the apartment window, watching soft rain drift across downtown Briarwood. Jeffrey walked up beside her slowly. "Long day?" Missouri smiled faintly. "Good day." Jeffrey nodded. The city lights glowed softly below them while comfortable silence settled between their shoulders. Then Missouri looked toward him carefully. "You know," she said quietly, "I used to wonder if seeing you again would destroy me." Jeffrey's chest tightened immediately. Missouri reached for his hand before continuing softly, "But somehow it healed us instead." Jeffrey looked down briefly at their fingers intertwined together, then back at her. "I'll spend the rest of my life being grateful you gave me another chance." Missouri smiled faintly. "You already are." Jeffrey gently brushed a loose curl behind her ear before leaning closer slowly. This time when he kissed her, there was no fear attached, no hesitation, no doubt. Only love finally rebuilt honestly from the ground up. And somewhere down the hallway, Ellie's sleepy voice suddenly yelled, "I heard romance!" Jeffrey burst into laughter against Missouri's shoulder while she covered her face smiling. "Go to sleep," she called back. "No promises," Ellie shouted. Huey's tired voice followed immediately afterward. "Ellie, stop yelling emotionally." Missouri laughed harder while Jeffrey wrapped one arm gently around her waist. Outside, rain continued falling softly across Briarwood. But inside the little apartment filled with sketches, laughter, and second chances, everything finally felt whole again. A year later, Rosie's Diner added something new near the register, a framed drawing. Most customers barely noticed it at first, but regulars always smiled when they did. The sketch showed 4 people sitting beneath rooftop string lights overlooking downtown Briarwood. A woman laughing, a little girl stealing fries, a quiet boy holding a sketch pad, and a man looking at all 3 of them like they were the best thing he'd ever seen. Huey signed his name carefully in the bottom corner. Rosie claimed it was historic artwork. Ellie claimed she deserved partial credit because she brought emotional energy to the composition. Nobody argued with her anymore. On Friday nights, the Turner-Schoen family still visited the diner often, usually the same booth near the back window, usually too loud. And somehow Rosie loved them for it. One evening, Jeffrey arrived late after a long meeting in Birmingham. The second he stepped through the diner doors, Ellie pointed dramatically from the booth. "There's our financially responsible father figure." Jeffrey stopped walking. "What does that even mean?" Missouri laughed into her drink while Huey quietly slid over to make room beside him. "It means she spends too much time online," Missouri explained. Jeffrey kissed Missouri softly before sitting down. The gesture happened naturally now, comfortably, no fear attached anymore. Ellie watched the kiss carefully before nodding in approval. "Okay, that one was less gross." "Thank you for your blessing," Jeffrey replied dryly. "You're welcome." Rosie appeared carrying fries almost immediately. "Your usual emotional support order?" Jeffrey looked toward Missouri. "This entire town is committed to this joke." "You started it," Missouri reminded him. "Fair." Dinner drifted into its usual chaos afterward. Ellie passionately explained playground politics. Huey talked about entering a junior architecture contest. Missouri described one of her hospital patients teaching nurses TikTok dances against their will. Jeffrey listened quietly while smiling more than he used to realize. Because this was still his favorite part of every week. Not the food, not the diner. Them. At one point, Huey pulled folded papers carefully from his backpack. "I got accepted," Missouri blinked. "Accepted where?" Huey handed over the letter shyly. Jeffrey leaned closer while Missouri read silently. Then suddenly she covered her mouth. "Oh my God!" Ellie immediately panicked. "What happened?" Missouri looked up emotionally. "He got invited to the statewide youth architecture program." Huey tried pretending it wasn't a huge deal. "It's just drawings." Jeffrey stared at him proudly. "Nobody," he said softly. "It's talent." Huey smiled shyly while Ellie grabbed the paper dramatically. "My brother is basically famous now. You said that because I won the spelling bee too." "That was temporary fame." Jeffrey laughed quietly while watching the twins argue again. And suddenly a memory hit him hard. 5 years ago, he sat alone in a silent apartment staring at an ultrasound photo while fear convinced him he was protecting himself. Now his son was designing buildings. His daughter ran conversations like a tiny politician, and the woman he loved sat beside him laughing under warm diner lights. He almost lost all of this. The thought still humbled him every single day. Later that night after dinner, the 4 of them walked slowly through downtown Briarwood together beneath glowing storefront lights. Ellie skipped ahead dramatically, while Huey walked beside Jeffrey discussing building designs near the courthouse. Missouri stayed slightly behind, watching them both quietly. Jeffrey noticed eventually. "What?" Missouri smiled softly. "Nothing. That's my line." She shrugged lightly. "I was just thinking, dangerous activity." Missouri laughed quietly before slipping her hand into his. Jeffrey looked down at their fingers intertwined together naturally, still not something he took for granted. Thank you, Missouri said softly. Jeffrey frowned slightly. For what? For coming back? The honesty in her voice caught him off guard. Jeffrey stopped walking briefly, because no matter how much healing happened, part of him still carried guilt for needing a second chance in the first place. Missouri noticed immediately. I know, she whispered. You still blame yourself. Jeffrey exhaled quietly. I always will a little. Missouri stepped closer gently beneath the downtown lights. Maybe, she looked up at him carefully. But our story didn't end there. Emotion tightened visibly in Jeffrey's chest, because she was right. The worst moment of his life no longer defined the ending. Healing did. Family did. Love did. Ahead of them, Ellie suddenly yelled, Y'all are walking too slow for romance again. Several strangers nearby laughed immediately. Jeffrey closed his eyes briefly. She humiliates me recreationally. She gets that from Rosie. Definitely. Huey looked back calmly. She's not wrong, though. Jeffrey stared at him in betrayal. You too? Huey shrugged. You were doing emotional eye contact. Missouri burst into laughter while Jeffrey shook his head helplessly. And somewhere between the teasing, the city lights, and the warmth of Missouri's hand in his, Jeffrey realized something beautiful. The life he once feared losing had become the life he finally deserved. Not because he was perfect, but because he learned. Love required trust. Fear could destroy beautiful things, and real redemption wasn't spoken. It was lived, every day, together. Above them, warm Alabama rain began falling softly once again. And this time, nobody ran from it. Years later, people in Briarwood still told the story differently depending on who you asked. Rosie claimed the entire relationship survived because of fries. Ellie insisted she personally saved the family through advanced emotional observation. Huey argued it all started with oranges. Jeffrey and Missouri, they usually just looked at each other and smiled, because honestly, all three versions were probably true. By the twins' 10th birthday, life had changed in quiet, beautiful ways. Huey's sketches became detailed enough that local businesses started asking permission to frame copies inside their offices. Ellie joined theater and immediately became impossible to contain emotionally. Missouri finally reduced some hospital shifts after years of overworking herself. And Jeffrey learned how to build things that mattered more than skyscrapers, like trust, like consistency, like home. One summer evening, the family gathered again on the rooftop above Rosie's diner for the twins' birthday dinner. String lights glowed warmly overhead while music drifted softly through downtown Briarwood below. The city looked beautiful tonight. Huey sat beside Jeffrey, showing him a new design for a community center he wanted to build someday. Ellie dramatically explained why birthday cake should legally replace vegetables. Missouri laughed harder than she used to years ago. Freer now, lighter. At one point, Rosie placed a birthday cake onto the table proudly. 10 candles flickered warmly against the Alabama night air. My favorite chaotic family, Rosie announced emotionally. Ellie pointed immediately. You cried first. I'm elderly. We leak feelings. Nobody argued with that logic. The twins leaned forward together before blowing out the candles at the exact same moment. Cheers and laughter filled the rooftop afterward, while downtown lights shimmered softly below them. Jeffrey watched everything quietly for a second. Then Missouri noticed. You're thinking too hard again. He smiled instantly. Still doing that, huh? Always. Jeffrey looked around the rooftop slowly. At Huey laughing beside Rosie. At Ellie aggressively stealing frosting. At Missouri glowing beneath the string lights. And emotion tightened gently inside his chest again. Not painful anymore. Grateful. I was just thinking, he admitted softly, how close I came to losing all this. Immediately, she reached for his hand beneath the table naturally now. No hesitation left between them anymore. You found your way back, she whispered. Jeffrey looked down briefly at their intertwined fingers, then toward the twins again. No, he said quietly. You let me. Missouri's eyes glistened faintly at the words. Because after everything, after heartbreak, after fear, after rebuilding trust piece by piece, this family existed because they chose forgiveness over bitterness. Not instantly, not easily, but intentionally. Ellie suddenly interrupted the emotional moment by pointing dramatically toward the fruit tray near the cake. Oh no, everyone looked over. 2 oranges rolled across the rooftop floor. Silence. Then laughter exploded around the table instantly. Even Jeffrey laughed hard enough to lower his head briefly. Huey shook his head, smiling. Of course it's oranges again. Rosie crossed her arms proudly. That's destiny fruit. Missouri laughed into Jeffrey's shoulder while Ellie chased one of the oranges dramatically across the rooftop. And suddenly the moment felt strangely perfect. Not because life became flawless, because it became real, messy, warm, human, the kind of happiness people trust more because they fought for it first. Later that night, after the twins fell asleep during the car ride home, Jeffrey carried Huey upstairs while Missouri held Ellie against her shoulder. The apartment remained softly quiet as they tucked both kids into bed carefully. Huey mumbled sleepily, "Don't forget my sketchbook." Jeffrey smiled softly, "Never." A few minutes later, Jeffrey and Missouri stood alone together near the apartment balcony, while warm rain drifted gently across Briarwood once more. Some things never changed. Missouri leaned lightly against him, while city lights shimmered below. "You know," she said softly, "for a long time I thought the worst day of my life was the night you walked away." Jeffrey's chest tightened immediately. Missouri looked up at him carefully. "But now," she smiled faintly, "I think it was just the beginning of the story." Emotion flickered across Jeffrey's face. Because 5 years ago he thought fear protected him. Instead, it almost destroyed the best thing he'd ever known. Now he understood something much more important. Love was never about certainty. It was about trust, showing up, choosing people repeatedly even after life scared you. Jeffrey gently kissed Missouri's forehead while rain tapped softly against the balcony railing beside them. Inside the apartment, their children slept peacefully down the hallway, safe, loved, home. And somewhere deep inside himself, Jeffrey finally understood the truth he spent years running from. The richest man in Alabama was never the billionaire builder. It was the man standing in a small apartment beside the woman he loved, listening to the quiet sound of his family breathing safely nearby. 10 years after the rainy night at Rosie's Diner, Briarwood still looked almost the same. Same glowing storefronts downtown, same slow Alabama evenings, same diner sitting on the corner with warm lights shining through the windows. But inside that little town, lives had changed completely. Huey Turner Schoen grew taller than Jeffrey before turning 16. He still carried sketchbooks everywhere, only now his drawings covered entire tables during architecture competitions across the state. Teachers called him gifted. Jeffrey called him stubborn. Missouri called him the reason pencils disappear from this apartment. Meanwhile, Ellie somehow became even louder with age, which nobody thought was scientifically possible. At 16, she ran the debate team, theater club, and apparently half the emotional atmosphere of Briarwood High School. "She negotiates like a lawyer," Jeffrey once warned a teacher. The teacher sighed heavily. "We know. Some things never changed. Friday nights still belonged to Rosie's Diner. Movie nights still became chaotic, and emotional support fries remained a permanent family tradition." One rainy evening, the family gathered once again on the rooftop patio above the diner. Only now the twins looked almost grown. Missouri leaned comfortably beside Jeffrey while watching Ellie passionately tell a story involving school drama, 3 milkshakes, and what she called a betrayal involving garlic bread. Huey quietly sketched the rooftop lights nearby. Jeffrey watched them both with the same expression he'd worn for years now, gratitude. Rosie appeared carrying fresh fries despite nobody asking. "You people are emotionally dependent on potatoes," Ellie pointed dramatically. "You raised us this way." "That's fair." Laughter drifted warmly across the rooftop, while soft rain tapped gently against the awning overhead. Missouri glanced sideways at Jeffrey. "You're thinking again." Jeffrey smiled faintly. "Still doing that?" "Always." He looked out across downtown Briarwood quietly, then finally admitted, "I wasted so much time being afraid." Missouri rested her head lightly against his shoulder. "Yes," she answered honestly. Jeffrey laughed softly under his breath. "You always keep me humble. You survived billionaire success. Someone had to." He smiled before looking toward the twins again. Huey now discussing building design with Rosie. Ellie stealing fries directly off Missouri's plate without shame. Family. Still the most beautiful word he knew. After a while, Huey suddenly looked up from his sketchpad. "Actually," he said thoughtfully, "I think Dad needed the fear." The table grew quieter. Jeffrey frowned slightly. "That's an alarming sentence." Huey shrugged lightly. "If none of the bad stuff happened," he glanced around the table carefully, "maybe none of us become this version of ourselves." Missouri's eyes softened instantly. Even Ellie looked emotional for almost 3 seconds, which was a personal record. Jeffrey stared quietly at his son afterward, because somehow, the boy he once lost had grown into someone wise enough to understand forgiveness better than most adults ever do. Ellie immediately ruined the emotional moment by pointing dramatically at Huey. "Wow, that was deep. I'm capable of depth. You usually draw buildings. There are emotional buildings." Jeffrey laughed helplessly while Missouri shook her head, smiling. Some things truly never changed. Later that night, after Rosie closed the diner downstairs, the family remained alone on the rooftop beneath glowing string lights. Warm rain drifted softly beyond the awning while Briarwood shimmered quietly below them. Jeffrey stood near the railing looking out over the city he spent most of his life trying to conquer. Funny thing was, none of the skyscrapers mattered much anymore, not compared to this. Missouri stepped beside him quietly. "What are you thinking about now?" Jeffrey looked toward her slowly. "The first night I met you." Missouri smiled faintly. "The oranges, the panic." She laughed softly. "You definitely looked confused. I was trying to impress you. You offered fruit assistance." "Exactly." Missouri leaned gently against him while city lights reflected softly in her eyes. "You know what's strange?" she whispered. "What?" "You becoming a good father healed parts of me I thought were gone forever." The honesty in her voice hit him deeply. Because no award, no business success, no amount of money could ever mean more than hearing that. Jeffrey brushed his thumb softly across her hand. "You and the twins saved my life." Missouri looked up at him immediately. "No," she whispered gently. "You finally stopped running from it." For a moment neither spoke. They simply stood together listening to the quiet rain and distant city sounds below. Then suddenly Ellie's voice interrupted from behind them. "If y'all start kissing again, we're leaving." Jeffrey closed his eyes, briefly laughing. "She really destroys every emotional moment." "She got that from Rosie," Missouri whispered. "Definitely." Huey calmly kept sketching nearby. "I already included the romance in the drawing." Jeffrey looked horrified. "You're drawing this?" "It's artistic honesty." Missouri burst into laughter while Jeffrey covered his face dramatically. And somehow, that became the perfect final moment. Not grand, not cinematic, just real. A family healed through time, patience, accountability, and love. The kind of love that survives mistakes because people choose each other again afterward. Above them, warm Alabama rain continued falling softly across the rooftop where everything once began. And beneath the glowing lights of Briarwood, the family Jeffrey Schoen almost lost forever sat together laughing into the night. Sometimes the biggest mistakes in life don't happen because people stop loving each other. Sometimes they happen because fear becomes louder than trust. Jeffrey spent years believing protecting his heart mattered more than risking it, and in one single moment, he lost the woman he loved, missed 5 years with his children, and nearly destroyed the future he secretly wanted most. But what makes this story special isn't that he made a mistake. It's that he finally took responsibility for it. No excuses, no blaming his past, no demanding forgiveness, just showing up consistently. Until love slowly believed him again. And honestly, that's what real healing usually looks like. Not giant speeches, not dramatic miracles, just people choosing each other repeatedly after life gives them every reason not to. So if this story touched your heart even a little, take a second and ask yourself, have you ever let fear ruin something beautiful? And if you had the chance, would you fight to fix it? If this story moved you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Mr. Williams Storytime for more powerful emotional stories every week. And before you go, tell me in the comments, do you think Missouri forgave Jeffrey too easily? Or did he truly earn his second chance? Until next time, good night, Briarwood.